Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. We were closing up around 11:30. It was a Thursday, mid-June, warm, even after dark, humid enough that the bugs stuck to your arms when you stepped outside. I worked the night shift at Miller's Station on the edge of town, right off Route 6, just past the old drive-in. Tiny place. One of those two-pump gas stations with a single register and a cooler that always hums too loud. That night, it was me, Jenna, and Terrence. We staggered shifts most nights, but Thursdays we all closed together. I was mopping the back by the ice chest, Jenna was restocking smokes, and Terrence was outside smoking one. It was quiet. No cars on the lot, no customers for maybe 20 minutes, just the bug zapper ticking and the overhead lights buzzing. Then the lights flickered, just once. Not full off, more like a brownout. Cooler buzz dropped an octave, security monitor blinked, fluorescence dimmed for maybe 2 seconds. Then everything came back like normal. I looked at Jenna. She looked at me. "You see that?" I asked. She nodded but didn't say anything. We both looked toward the front window. Terrence was still out there, leaning on the ice chest, smoke in one hand, other in his pocket. He didn't seem fazed, so I figured it was just a power hiccup. We get those during storms, and even though it was clear that night, the air felt off. Thick, heavy. Jenna went back to the shelf. I finished mopping. A couple minutes later, Terrence came back inside. He didn't say anything, just walked past us and started sweeping by the doors. I asked if he saw the lights flicker, and he just blinked at me. "What lights?" he said. I thought maybe he'd gone around the side or something. Missed it. I didn't push. We locked up 10 minutes later. Jenna grabbed her keys and left first, and I followed maybe 30 seconds after her. I remember that part really clearly because I stopped to grab an energy drink from the cooler before I walked out, and I dropped it right as I opened the door. Slipped from my hand, cracked open on the tile. I had to go back behind the counter for paper towels. When I finally stepped outside, Jenna was sitting in her car with the engine running, just staring out the windshield. I waved at her and she sort of jumped like she'd just noticed me. Then she drove off fast, no goodbye. Terrence was still inside, said he had to stay and do inventory because we were behind on it. I didn't argue. I got in my car and drove home. Next morning around 10, Mr. Miller called me. Not angry, just weirded out. "You know anything about the lights?" I thought he meant the power flicker. I said yeah, it blinked out for a second, but everything was fine. He said, "No, not that, the parking lot lights." I had no idea what he meant, and he didn't explain much over the phone. Just asked if I could come in early and take a look at something. I showed up around noon. Jenna was already there, sitting in the break room, quiet. Didn't even look up when I walked in. Mr. Miller took me to the little office in the back and pulled up the footage from the security cameras. There's one that points out across the parking lot toward Route 6, catches the pumps, the street light, and a patch of sky above the tree line. He hit play. It was us Thursday night, around 11:20 or so. You could see Terrence outside leaning on the ice chest just like I remembered. Me inside, mopping, Jen at the register. Then around 11:26, the feed glitched for a second, just like I remembered. But when it came back, the lights were there. 3 of them. In the sky, above the lot. Not bright like floodlights, dimmer, yellowish white. Formed a perfect triangle. Not spinning, not moving, just hovering. Dead still. No beam, no sound, no other source. They weren't lens flares or reflections. You could see them cast faint shadows on the pavement, soft but real. And they just hung there, exactly like that, for maybe 4 minutes. The 3 of us went about our business. I mopped, Jenna restocked, Terrence smoked. None of us looked up. None of us reacted. Terrence even walked right beneath them to toss his cigarette in the bin. Eventually, the lights faded out. Not all at once. First, the left point dimmed until it was gone, then the top, then the right. A few seconds apart, like someone powering down. Mr. Miller let the video run. Nothing else happened. Just us, locking up, walking out. Jenna sitting in her car. Me coming out after. Nothing dramatic. I asked if it was edited. He shook his head and backed up the footage to earlier in the day. Everything else looked normal. Cars pulling in, customers, birds flying across the lens, the usual. I watched it 3 times. Same thing each time. I couldn't remember seeing them. I should have. They were right above the lot, big enough to blot out some stars, low enough to see without squinting. When I got home, I called Jenna. She didn't pick up. I texted her, "Did you see the lights?" She texted back 2 hours later, "What lights?" That night, I brought it up to Terrence during shift. He shrugged and said maybe it was a glitch. Surveillance stuff's always buggy, he said. But I could tell it bothered him. He kept checking the sky, not obviously, but I noticed. 3 nights later, Saturday, we got a guy at the pump, older guy in a Chevy Suburban. He came in to pay cash, then asked if we'd had a drone show or something on Thursday. I asked why, and he said he'd been driving past around 11:30 through and saw some strange arrangement of lights hovering above the store. Said they didn't move, didn't make a sound, just floated there, like someone had hung lanterns in the sky. I asked if he'd ever seen them before. He said no. I asked if he saw us looking up, and he said no. Didn't seem like anybody noticed, he said. Kinda creeped me out. I told him he wasn't the only one. After he left, I pulled up the footage again. Watched it one more time. It was the same. 3 lights, triangle, no movement, no reaction from us. But something was different. This time, when the lights faded, there was a flicker, just a few frames, and I caught it by accident. Had to rewind 5 or 6 times to stop it, right? For maybe a second, right before the last light went out, the camera caught a figure standing at the edge of the lot near the dumpster. Just inside the light, no movement, no approach, just standing. No one had been out there. We would have seen it. But on that frame, it was there, not clear, kind of blurred, like the shutter caught it mid-step, even though it wasn't moving. Looked tall, skinny, wearing something that didn't catch the light right. Hard to describe. I never showed Mr. Miller that part. Haven't talked to Jenna about it either. Sometimes I still drive by late after my shift at the new job. The station's still there, still open. Same pumps, same flickering sign. But I never stop. Just slow down and look up. I was cutting through a stretch of back road between Kayenta and Page. Real empty country, red rock and dust, nothing but scrub and sky. It was late afternoon, but the sun was dropping fast behind the cliffs, turning everything orange and long-shadowed. I'd left Phoenix that morning and figured I'd stop for gas in Page, maybe grab a room if I got tired. The GPS had routed me onto this weird, narrow highway, State Route 98. It wasn't a road I'd ever taken, but it seemed faster than going around. My signal had cut out an hour earlier, but the map was still loaded, so I just kept going. I hadn't seen another car for a good 30 miles, not one. No billboards, no gas stations, no fences, just mesas and sand. It was almost peaceful until it wasn't. I first noticed it when I came over a rise and dipped into this shallow canyon. The road curved, then ran straight for a long stretch between 2 ridges. I checked my rear view, habit, I guess, and saw headlights, 2 of them. Close. I hadn't passed anyone. There were no turnoffs, no lights behind me for hours. But now, clear as day, someone was following me. I slowed down a little to let them catch up, thinking maybe it was a ranger or a local. But the lights kept the same distance, not gaining, not falling back, just there. I tapped my brakes a few times. Nothing. They didn't flash theirs or react in any way. The weirdest thing was I couldn't see the car, just the lights. Bright, like high beams, but not blinding. They didn't bounce or shift like headlights usually do when someone's hitting bumps or small hills. They just floated there. Same height, same spacing, same brightness. Too steady. After a few miles of this, I figured maybe it was just a trick of the road. Maybe there was a truck on a different highway behind me, and the angle made it look like it was tailing me. I decided to pull over and let it pass. There was a gravel shoulder wide enough to stop, so I eased onto it, threw on my hazards, and waited. The lights kept coming. But here's the thing. When I looked in the side mirror, I didn't see anything. The rear view still showed the lights, but the side mirror, just empty desert. I even leaned out the window a little to check. Nothing there. That's when I realized there was no road behind me. Not anymore. I swear to God, I'd just been driving that same stretch. Asphalt, yellow lines, the whole deal. But when I look back now, it was just scrub and rock. No pavement, no tire marks, just open land. I thought maybe I'd turned without noticing, like there'd been a split in the road. But no, my tires were still on asphalt. I even opened the door and stepped out. The wind was picking up, carrying that dry, hot smell you only get out there. I walked a few feet behind the car. No road. It didn't make sense. I should have been able to see it stretching back at least a few hundred feet, but it just wasn't there. It looked like the road started right under my back tires and didn't exist before that. I walked back to the driver's side and checked the mirror again. Still lights, still behind me. I climbed back in and started driving again. Not fast, just steady. I watched the mirror the whole time. The lights didn't follow, they stayed in the same spot. Then, after about 5 minutes, they were gone. No fade, no curve in the road to hide them, just gone. I didn't feel relief. I felt watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder even though I knew nothing was there. Another few miles passed, the sun was nearly down now, and the whole desert looked flat and gray. That's when my headlights flickered. Once, twice, then stayed on. I tapped the dash, probably just a loose wire, I figured. The rental had been making a weird sound since I picked it up. A minute later, the engine made this soft whining noise like it was straining. RPMs dipped. The whole car jerked once, then smoothed out. That's when I saw a movement up ahead. Something crossed the road. Quick, low to the ground. I only caught it in my peripheral vision. Might have been a coyote, but it didn't move like one. It didn't run. It sort of glided. I slowed down to look, but there was nothing. No prints, no shape disappearing into the brush. The air felt weird, heavy. Not hot anymore, just thick. Then the static started. It came through the speakers, even though the radio was off. Just a low hiss, barely noticeable, but rising. Like a storm was nearby. I turned the knob, nothing changed. Tried to shut the stereo off completely, but it didn't respond. The hiss kept building until it suddenly cut out. Silence. That's when I noticed the sky. It wasn't dark yet, not fully, but the stars were already out, except above me. Directly overhead, there was this perfect circle of empty sky. No stars, just blank. It didn't look like a cloud. It was too precise, too still. I kept driving. A mile or two later, I saw lights again, but not behind me this time. Off to the side, maybe half a mile out, floating low over the desert. Two of them, close together, moving slow. I figured it might be a drone or a tower, but then they split. One went left, one went right. Both rose at the same time, then dropped in sync, then vanished. I pulled over again. I needed to breathe. When I stepped out, I noticed this faint humming. Not from the car, from the air. It was high-pitched and constant, like the sound you hear when a TV's on in another room. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, and then I heard something behind me. A soft crunch. I spun around. Nothing. Another crunch. Closer. I didn't see anything, but I swear something was moving through the brush, just out of sight. I got back in the car and locked the doors, took off down the road faster than I probably should have. Eventually, I saw a sign for Page, still about 20 miles out. The road widened a bit, and I started seeing the occasional fence post or light in the distance. Civilization creeping back in. The second I hit town limits, everything stopped. The static, the humming, the weird pressure in the air. I pulled into a gas station and sat in the lot for 10 minutes before getting out. Just stared at the lights, the other people, the pavement. Normal things. I looked behind me. The road was there, plain as day. 2 lanes, yellow stripes, tire marks, everything. But I checked the car's trip meter. The mileage didn't line up with where I should have been. I should have driven about 130 miles that day. The meter said 89. I never thought I'd dig through those old radar logs again. But here I am, late one night, sitting at the kitchen table with a thick binder full of faded printouts, coffee getting cold beside me. The date stamp on these is from 1983, my last year working as a radar operator for a small, now defunct monitoring station near the southern shore of Lake Michigan. It was a quiet gig, mostly tracking commercial flights, occasional storms, nothing out of the ordinary. Except these. I retired decades ago and didn't really talk much about the job. Most people assumed it was boring, just beeping dots and routine shifts staring at screens. But once in a while, weird stuff showed up. Nothing official, just glitches or unidentified blips that no one could explain. Back then, we just logged them as anomalies and moved on. Last week, I found the old logs tucked in a box in the basement, buried under a bunch of papers I thought I'd tossed years ago. I flipped through the pages and saw clusters of entries marked with timestamps from the summer and fall of 1983. Dozens of blips moving in patterns that made no sense. The strange thing was how coordinated they looked, like they were flying in tight formations but doing impossible maneuvers, sharp angles, sudden stops, and accelerations way beyond any aircraft I knew. I wanted to make sense of it, so I started cross-referencing with flight records and weather reports. There were no planes, helicopters, or storms that matched these tracks. No radar stations anywhere else reported anything similar. Even air traffic control logs were blank during those times. One night in late October 1983 stood out. Around 9:45 p.m., for nearly an hour, these unregistered blips appeared, darting in tight circles, then splitting into groups that moved independently but seemed coordinated, almost like a school of fish underwater. The patterns were smooth but unnatural, sudden 90-degree turns, hovering in place, then zipping off at speeds that would have shredded any pilot or mechanical system we knew. I remember my partner that night, Tom. He and I exchanged uneasy looks over the radar screen, both knowing this wasn't usual. We called the supervisor to report it. The response was to file a standard report and maintain normal operations. No further instructions, and the logs got marked as unidentified, no threat. That was it. No follow-up, no explanation. It stuck with me. Years later, I pieced together more info from others who worked in nearby stations. Several of us had seen similar things, but nobody ever talked openly. The military showed no interest, or maybe they did and just kept quiet. I don't know. What really got me unsettled was how those blips seemed to interact with the lake itself. At one point, the radar tracks dipped below the lake's surface level, or at least the system interpreted it that way, then reappeared a few minutes later miles away. It looked like the objects could move underwater, which made no sense for any aircraft. That October night, the air was cold and clear, and I remember stepping outside during a break. The sky was pitch black, stars scattered, no moon. The lake was calm, glassy. I stood there watching, half expecting to see something in the sky or on the water. But nothing visible showed up, just silence. The weirdest part? After that hour of strange activity, the radar suddenly went dead for about 10 minutes. No signal, no noise, just blank. Tom and I were ready to call maintenance, but the system came back online as if nothing happened. No errors logged. When I checked the data later, those blips vanished completely at the outage, like they disappeared through the blackout. I kept these logs private, mostly out of habit and maybe fear of being dismissed as a crazy old man. But going through the records again, I'm realizing how odd it all was, how much it doesn't fit into any usual explanation. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind is low, I imagine what it was like that night, those shapes moving silently over the lake, patterns no plane or bird could match, a radar screen lighting up with impossible formations. It's strange knowing something was out there, close enough to detect, but invisible to the eye, leaving no trace beyond blinking dots on an old screen. I've never tried to reach out to anyone about this. It feels like something meant to stay buried in those dusty logs, between the routine reports and weather data. But looking at the pages now, I can't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't just a glitch or a mistake. It was real, and it was watching over Lake Michigan in 1983. I don't know what else to say. Maybe someone else will make sense of it one day. But for now, I'm just glad I'm here, safe, and still able to remember. I was out in the backyard around 1 a.m. when I saw it. This was late September last year. I live in Gallatin, Tennessee, on the edge of town where there's not much light pollution. My house backs up to a patch of farmland that nobody's used in years, just waist-high grass and a few scraggly trees. Good sky visibility. I've been into amateur astronomy since college, nothing serious, just a backyard setup. I've got a Skywatcher 10-inch Dobsonian, and I usually take it out on weekends when the weather's decent. That night was clear, low humidity, barely any wind, cool but not cold, no moon. I'd gone out around 10 with my dog, Callie. She's a blue heeler mix, real hyper, always has to be in the middle of whatever I'm doing. I let her run a few laps around the yard while I set up. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just poking around. Saw Jupiter, tracked a couple satellites, took some notes. Typical stuff. Around 12:45, I started scanning the northeastern sky. Was trying to catch M33, the Triangulum Galaxy, but I wasn't quite lined up. I was panning a bit, adjusting focus, when I noticed something strange. It was just there. Perfectly round. Not glowing, not blinking, just a dark circle against the stars. And I mean perfectly round, like somebody had cut a black dot out of the sky. At first I thought it was a shadow from a high-altitude plane, but it wasn't moving like that. I kept watching. Through the scope, the object had no texture, no detail, just this flat black disc. I checked my alignment again, thinking maybe I was seeing an artifact or smudge. Cleaned the eyepiece, looked again. Still there. It was drifting, but not like a satellite or balloon. Too slow for low orbit, too steady for wind. It was going west-southwest, maybe 10 degrees every couple minutes. I tried to estimate altitude, hard to say exactly, but I'd guess under 10,000 feet. That's when I realized the wind on the ground was going the other way. Not hard, just a light breeze, maybe 5 or 6 miles per hour, going northeast. But this thing was going the opposite direction. Not fast, not jerky, just smooth and steady. I stepped away from the scope and looked up with the naked eye. I couldn't see it. Nothing obvious. But through the scope, it was still right there. Callie came over and sat next to me, which she never does while I'm stargazing. Usually she's tearing around the yard or chasing bugs. She sat down, leaned into my leg, and stared at the sky like she was tracking something. I went back to the scope. The object was still drifting, still featureless. No lights, no reflections. Just this silent black disc moving against the wind across a completely clear sky. I don't know how long I watched, maybe 20 minutes. It passed behind a few scattered tree branches way off across the field, which helped me confirm it wasn't an optical illusion. It had depth. Then it just stopped. Dead stop. Hung there. Not moving left or right, not climbing or descending. I waited, figuring it might reverse course or spin or something, but nothing. Just a silent black circle in the middle of the sky. The scope was on manual tracking, so I adjusted to keep it in frame. It stayed in place for about 4 minutes. Then it started to shrink, not like it was turning or disappearing, just getting smaller, straight line, straight up. Still no lights, no engine noise, no contrail. I followed it until it was too small to track. Callie barked once, short, loud, out of nowhere. She didn't bark at anything in particular, just stood up and barked at the empty sky. Then she ran to the back door and scratched at it like she was done. I packed everything up and went inside. Didn't even log the observation. Next morning, I walked out to the field with binoculars, thinking maybe it was a drone and someone had crashed it out there. Didn't find anything. No tracks, no gear, no lights or debris. Nothing. I asked my neighbor, Eric, if he'd seen anything weird in the sky that night. He's up late a lot. He said no, but mentioned his porch lights flickered sometime after midnight. Didn't think much of it. A few nights later, I set the scope back up. Same spot, same direction. Clear sky again. Nothing unusual. But right before I went in, maybe 2 a.m., Callie stopped at the edge of the yard and stared at the tree line across the field. Her ears went up, real stiff, and she growled. I didn't see anything. No movement, no eye shine, no noise. But she wouldn't come when I called. Just stood there, growling low. Eventually, she backed up real slow, never turning her back to the trees. Haven't taken the scope back out since. I was up before sunrise like usual, around 5. It was early April, still chilly in the mornings. Frost on the grass, breath visible when I stepped out, the kind of cold that settles into your fingers before the sun gets over the trees. My place is about 15 miles outside of La Junta, Colorado. Flat land, few neighbors, mostly dry grazing pasture, and a windmill pump that's been coughing since February. I've got 18 head of cattle, mostly Hereford mixes, and 2 mules named Dot and Charlie. That morning, I walked the fence line with my coffee and counted the herd like I always do. They were bunched up near the east fence, huddled together like they do when the wind shifts overnight. But one of them was standing off by herself, Nora. She's a 6-year-old cow, Calm temperament, not prone to spooking or wandering. But that morning, she was about 60 yards from the others, dead center in the lower field, just standing there. Didn't look hurt, no limping, no signs of a fall, but she wasn't grazing or chewing or flicking her ears like normal. She was stiff, legs locked, neck rigid, head straight forward, eyes wide open, like she was watching something I couldn't see. I called her name and walked a little closer. Usually if you get within 20 feet, she'll turn and look, or at least blink. But she didn't move, didn't even twitch. I figured maybe she'd gotten stuck in a ditch or stepped wrong and was just scared to move. I went back to the barn, grabbed a halter and some feed, came out thinking I'd coax her in slow. She hadn't moved an inch. By now the sun was fully up, warming things a little, but the air still had that dry, static feel. No birds, which I didn't think about until later. I came up slow from the side, didn't want to startle her. Still nothing. Her chest was rising, so I knew she was breathing, but shallow. No sound, no swishing tail, no stomping flies. When I got close enough to touch her, I hesitated. Something felt wrong. Not danger, exactly, just that out-of-place feeling, like walking into a room and forgetting why. I touched her flank. She didn't react. Her muscles were tense, hard under the skin, rigid. I moved to her head, waved my hand in front of her eye. No blink, just glassy and wide, pupils huge. I put the halter on and tried to guide her back toward the pen. Nothing. She might as well have been a statue. That's when I heard the sound. A low humming, so faint I almost missed it. Not coming from her, and not from the windmill. It was off to the north, above the tree line. I turned and scanned the horizon. Nothing in the air, no planes, no dust trail from the road. Just that steady hum like electricity through metal. It didn't get louder or change pitch. I stood there listening for a long minute, holding the rope, staring out at an empty sky. Then I looked back, and Nora's eyes were tracking something. She hadn't moved her head, but her eyes had shifted, just a bit, left to right, slowly. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing there, just air. I stood still, trying to see it, feel it, anything. No shadows, no movement. The sun was high enough now that it would have lit up anything in that direction, but I saw nothing. The humming stopped, just cut out like someone flipped a switch. Nora blinked, then she staggered like her legs had just remembered how to work. Took one slow, shaky step, then another. She let out a low, drawn-out bellow. The rest of the herd answered from the fence line and started moving toward her. I walked her back myself. She moved like she'd just come out of anesthesia, clumsy and dazed. Once she was in the pen, she went straight to water and stood there for a while before drinking. I checked her over again. Eyes, mouth, hooves. No wounds, no swelling. Just that dazed look. She stayed like that most of the day, barely moving. Ate a little hay around dusk. That night, I walked back out to the same spot in the field. No wind, no clouds, moon about half full. I stood where she'd been. Nothing unusual. No prints besides mine and hers. Grass wasn't burned or pressed down, but it was quiet. No frogs from the pond, no night birds. Even the windmill had stopped creaking. I stayed maybe 15 minutes. Felt like being watched the whole time, but I couldn't tell from where. Next morning, she was back to normal. Acting like nothing had happened, ate fine, walked fine, no stiffness, no hesitation. I called the vet a couple days later, told him what happened. He said sometimes cattle freeze like that during a seizure or after being stunned by lightning, but we hadn't had a storm in over a week. He came out and ran some tests, checked her blood, her eyes, nothing out of range, no parasites, no infections. I didn't tell him about the sound or her eyes tracking something invisible. Didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. A week later, I noticed a black circle on the north side of my barn's tin roof, about the size of a dinner plate, perfectly round. Not a stain, just a patch where the metal looked faded, like it had been bleached or sanded smooth. I tried scrubbing it, didn't come off. Paint won't stick to it. Nora's fine now, same as always, but she won't walk past that lower field anymore, not even close. I saw it from the dock behind my cabin. This was 2 summers ago. I'd been retired about 4 years at that point, commercial pilot, mostly domestic routes out of Denver, flew for 38 years, no incidents. I know the sky, I know what moves how, what lights belong to what. You get it burned into you after that long. My place is up in the Adirondacks on a little private lake about 45 minutes east of Old Forge. I split time between there and my daughter's place in Albany. But in the summers, I stay out here as much as I can. It's quiet. Just loons, trees, and water. That night, mid-July, I was out back around 10:30 with a glass of bourbon watching the sky. No moon, no clouds, just stars on full blast. I'd brought out the dog, Jasper. He's a husky mix, old as hell now. He was sniffing around the edge of the dock, not doing much. I wasn't looking for anything unusual. It was just a windless, clear night, warm but not muggy. Typical. Then I noticed something weird about the stars. A spot overhead, just left of Orion, looked wrong. Not moving, not blinking, just a blank patch. I thought maybe it was a cloud I'd missed, but there weren't any. I stood up, walked to the edge of the dock, and really looked at it. It was a shape, not a spot, not round. More like a stretched oval, sort of crooked on one end. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were staring right at it, because it didn't have lights or edges. It was just darker than the sky. It blocked stars, though. That's what got me. I could see a small cluster of stars near Orion, but every time I traced over them, they'd vanish inside that shape. Not dimmed, gone. Like something was between me and them. No sound, no trail, no reflection. Just this big, dark mass, slow moving. Jasper noticed it a minute after I did. He stopped sniffing and stared straight up, ears flat. Then he whined. Not loud, but sharp. He doesn't usually whine unless he's in pain or scared. I knelt next to him and kept looking. The thing was still drifting, maybe northeast, but too slow for any aircraft I've ever seen. Way too smooth. If it were a plane, I'd have heard something, even at altitude, even if it was gliding. If it were a weather balloon, it would have had some drift, a wobble, something. This didn't wobble. It held shape, moved like it was being pulled by something invisible. I went inside and got my binoculars. Not the best ones, just a mid-range Nikon pair I use for birds. When I looked through them, I couldn't focus on the shape itself. It was like my eyes kept sliding off it. I could see stars around it, clear as day, but as soon as I tried to focus on the mass, it blurred out. It wasn't my eyes. I tried cleaning the lenses. Same result. I watched it for maybe 5 minutes. Jasper paced the dock the whole time, tail tucked, never barking. Then, just like that, the shape wasn't there anymore. I don't mean it sped off. I mean it was just gone. 1 second I was tracking it against Cassiopeia, and the next I was staring at the full sky. Stars that had been blocked were back. No delay. No wind. No noise. Nothing. I figured maybe I'd had one too many drinks, so I walked inside and poured some coffee. Sat in the living room for an hour, waiting to feel dumb, but I didn't. I couldn't shake that feeling, like something had been above me. Not just high in the sky. Closer. I tried telling a buddy of mine, Scott, who flew KC-10s back in the day. He's one of the few people I figured might take me seriously. He didn't laugh, but he did that thing where he rubbed his chin and said, "Weird," a lot. Then he changed the subject. Next night, same time, I went back out there with a lawn chair, a notebook, and Jasper. We waited. Nothing. Clear sky, stars everywhere, no black spots. But around 11, Jasper started acting strange again. He stood up real stiff, stared at the tree line behind us, not the sky this time, and gave a low growl. There's nothing behind the cabin but forest. I stood up and looked too. Couldn't see anything. No wind, no animals, not even crickets. Just silence. Jasper stayed rigid for maybe 30 seconds, then sat down hard, like someone pressed down on him. He didn't move for the rest of the night. I stayed out until almost 1. No shape came back. About a week later, I mentioned it to the guy who runs the hardware store in town. He lives on the other side of the lake. I didn't say what I saw, just asked if he'd noticed anything strange in the sky lately. He hesitated a little too long before saying no. Then he asked if I'd had power blips that week. I said no, everything was fine. He said his place flickered out for about 30 seconds Tuesday night. Lights, fridge, even his watch reset. Same night I saw the shape. Jasper won't go near the dock after dark now, not even for a treat. I tried to coax him down there a few nights later, and he stopped halfway, looked up, and backed off. I've seen weather balloons, satellites, stealth bombers, all of it. I've flown over 3 continents and landed in all kinds of conditions. I've never seen anything move like that thing did. Or not move, I guess. Whatever it wasn't flying in any way I've seen before. It was just there, moving without moving, blocking the sky like a thumb over your eye. And then it wasn't. I set up the camera trap deep in the woods just like I always do, near a creek bend where deer and foxes usually come to drink. It was late October, the kind of damp, gray afternoon that makes the forest smell like wet earth and fallen leaves. I'd been working on this wildlife photography project for months, mostly by myself, lugging gear through mud and over roots, waiting for something worth shooting. My dog Pippa, a lean border collie mix with sharp eyes and a quiet nature, came along most days. She's good company and doesn't scare the animals off. I didn't expect anything weird that afternoon. Just the usual quiet and the occasional rustle of squirrels or birds. I was aiming to catch a few shots of the bucks that come through just before dusk. The spot I picked was perfect. Thick brush on one side, a clearing on the other, and enough cover to hide the camera without disturbing anything. I placed the camera on a sturdy branch about 5 feet off the ground, angled toward the creek where I'd seen tracks a few days before. I tested the motion sensor, packed up, and told Pippa we were heading back. It was chilly, and the sky was heavy with low clouds that promised rain later. I didn't bother with the big lens today, just the camera trap and my usual backpack with essentials. A week later, I went back to check the footage. This part of the forest is quiet. No one's really around except the occasional hiker or hunter, but mostly it's just the animals. The path to the creek is narrow and overgrown, so I moved carefully to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. I found the camera exactly where I left it, still securely fastened. Pippa sniffed around but didn't seem bothered. I pulled out the SD card and popped it into my laptop as soon as I got home. The first few frames were what I expected. Squirrels, rabbits, a fox slipping through the brush, a family of deer drinking at the creek. Then, about halfway through the footage, things got odd. There were 5 frames out of hundreds that were corrupted. The image was mostly static with blocks of digital noise. The camera had clearly been triggered by something, but the picture wouldn't load properly. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. Maybe the card was damaged, but the weird part was the timing. The corrupted frames were all within a couple seconds, right in the middle of the video and right where the creek is visible. I zoomed in and enhanced the static as much as I could. The edges of a figure showed through, tall and thin, standing upright among the trees. The shape was vaguely humanoid, but blurred, like the camera couldn't quite capture it. It wasn't like any animal or person I'd ever seen on the trail. I showed the frames to a friend who's into photography and digital editing. He said sometimes cameras mess up when something reflects light oddly or moves too fast, but he admitted this was unusual, especially since the rest of the footage was clean. I went back to the spot the next day, Pippa and I walking the trail slowly. I tried to imagine what could have caused those corrupted frames. A deer crashing through the brush? A hunter in a jacket? Nothing felt right. The trees were still, no fresh broken branches or footprints near the camera. That afternoon, I stayed until dusk, sitting on a log near the creek, watching for anything out of place. The forest was quiet in a different way. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, just this heavy silence. Pippa was tense, ears twitching constantly. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving just beyond the tree line, a shadow or a flicker. But when I looked directly, nothing was there. Later that night, I checked the footage again. This time, I noticed something else. In the frames before and after the corrupted ones, there was a faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze or a thin veil of mist, but it only appeared briefly around that figure. The next morning, I decided to set the camera back up, but closer to the edge of the clearing, hoping to get a better angle. I also left a small voice recorder running, just in case. Over the next few days, I checked the equipment regularly. Nothing else was corrupted, and the audio captured only normal forest sounds. Wind, birds, distant branches snapping. But one evening, while reviewing the footage on my laptop, I saw movement again near the same spot. This time, it wasn't blurred or corrupted, but oddly distant, like it was caught through frosted glass. A tall shape moving slowly among the trees, but no clear details. Pippa started growling softly when I rewound the clip. I tried to explain it away, a trick of the light, maybe fog or dust on the lens. But the more I looked, the less it made sense. A few nights later, I stayed in my cabin at the edge of the forest. It was rainy and cold outside. Pippa was curled up by the fire. I was scrolling through the footage again when I noticed something that hadn't struck me before. Timestamps around the corrupted frames were off by a few seconds, like the camera's clock had glitched right when the figure appeared. The next day, I checked the camera itself. It worked fine, except for the SD card, which I swapped out. After that, the strange appearances stopped. The forest seemed normal again, with regular wildlife and no weird shimmer or shadows. Still, sometimes when I walk that trail alone, Pippa stops and stares off into the trees. She doesn't bark or growl, just watches, tense. I can't shake the feeling that whatever was there, it was aware of me, watching. Maybe it's still there. I don't know what I saw, or what showed up on those corrupted frames. I just know the forest felt different for a while, like something was there, hiding in plain sight. I live out near the edge of town where the houses thin out and the forest starts. There's this patch of military land that's fenced off a few miles from my place. Not something you really think about much during the day, just a no trespassing sign and the occasional patrol truck going by. But the noise? That's what's been messing with me. It started a couple months ago. I'd be lying in bed just about to fall asleep, and around 3 a.m. this low roar would fill the air. It sounded like jets, or maybe those military helicopters, but louder and closer than I'd ever heard around here. It wasn't some distant rumble. It felt like the engines were right over the treetops, like they were diving low or racing past my window. It always happened exactly at 3 a.m., like clockwork. At first, I figured it was just training exercises. The base nearby runs drills, and I'm used to hearing the odd plane sometimes. But I'm also the kind of person who keeps an eye on flight trackers and military flight info, just out of curiosity. So I started checking every time the noise happened. Nothing showed up. No jets or helicopters near my area at that hour. No flights on any apps or websites I could find. No radar blips, no warnings or notifications from the base. It was like the noise was there, but the craft itself wasn't. The first few nights I thought maybe my neighbors heard it too, so I asked around during the day. Most said they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Some joked I was imagining things. One neighbor, a retired Air Force guy named Hank, said he hadn't heard jets at that hour in years. He suggested it might be distant thunder or some weird wind pattern, but it didn't sound like thunder, and it sure didn't sound like wind. I started recording it on my phone. The first time I played it back, the next morning, the audio was mostly static and low-frequency rumble, nothing clear. But if you listened close, you could hear that roar building, fading, and then cutting off sharply like someone flipping a switch. There was also this weird vibrating sensation in the floorboards and windows when the noise hit. My dog, Luna, a scrappy black lab mix, would stop whatever she was doing and stare toward the forest edge, ears up and tail still. She never barked, just this tense, watchful silence. One night, I decided to go outside to see if I could catch a glimpse of anything. I waited on my back porch, phone in hand, around 2:50 a.m. The air was cold and damp, the kind that settles into your bones. The forest behind my yard was quiet except for some rustling leaves and distant owls. At exactly 3 a.m., the roar started, growing louder like a wave rushing over me. I turned toward the tree line, but all I saw was darkness. No streaks of light, no flashing navigation bulbs, nothing in the sky. Just that noise, low and powerful. The strange part was how quickly it vanished. 1 second it was roaring, the next it was gone, leaving the night completely still and quiet again. I felt this odd ringing in my ears, like when you've been near a loud concert. Over the next few weeks, the pattern kept up. Every night at 3, that low roar. No lights, no aircraft on radar, no official reports or notices. Sometimes the noise felt closer, like it was coming right over my house. Other nights, it was farther out near the military zone. One morning, I woke up feeling off, like I'd been half awake the whole night. I checked my phone's clock. It was 3:45 a.m. I tried to remember if the noise had happened, but my memory was fuzzy. That day, I caught myself zoning out at work, like I was still stuck in some weird in-between state. A few nights later, Luna started acting strange. She wouldn't come inside when I called her. She stood at the edge of the forest, growling low, hair on her back raised. I shined my flashlight where she was looking, but all I could see was trees swaying in the night breeze. The roar came at 3 again, and this time I swear the air smelled different, like burnt rubber mixed with something metallic, the kind of smell you don't expect in the middle of a forest. Luna whimpered and ran inside as soon as the sound faded. I started leaving my porch light on some nights, hoping to catch whatever was making that noise. Once I saw a flicker of something in the distance, like a fast-moving shadow or a flash of reflective metal, but it disappeared before I could point my phone's camera. There were days when I felt watched, like eyes hidden behind the trees tracking my every move. I never heard footsteps or saw anyone, just this heavy feeling pressing in when I was outside alone. One time, my neighbor Hank came over around dusk. We sat on my porch talking about the noise and the missing radar sightings. He said something about old Cold War experiments and secret tech that could fool radar systems, but he wasn't sure if it was connected. That night I tried recording again. The roar came, but this time there was a strange, rhythmic hum mixed in. It wasn't mechanical, more like a vibration under your skin. Luna barked twice, then stopped, staring hard into the woods. I felt like I should go look, but I was too scared to move. After a few more nights of this, the noise just stopped. No more 3 a.m. roars, no hums or vibrations. The forest was quiet again, but I noticed something else. My clock was off by a few minutes. My phone sometimes lagged when I tried to check the time exactly at 3, and Luna refused to go near the forest edge anymore. I never told anyone else about all this, not really. I don't know what I heard or why it stopped. No one can explain it, and honestly, I'm not sure I want them to. The forest and that military zone are still there, quiet now, but I sometimes catch myself glancing at the clock when it nears 3 a.m., waiting for that roar that never comes. I was driving back home from Portland late one Saturday night, maybe around 1 a.m., taking Highway 42 down toward the coast. It's a long, mostly straight stretch of road through a lot of empty farmland and patches of forest. Pretty quiet at night, except for the occasional truck or deer. I remember it was cold, a little foggy, but not enough to mess with visibility. The headlights were cutting through just fine, and the road was mostly empty. I had the radio on low, some old country station playing, nothing too distracting. About 10 miles outside of Reedsville, I saw him. A guy standing on the side of the highway, thumb out, like your classic hitchhiker. He was dressed in a dark hoodie, jeans, and had a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. I slowed down a bit to get a better look, but he didn't move, just stood there, completely still, facing the road, staring right at me as I passed by. It was the way he looked at me that caught me off guard. Not angry or desperate, just fixed. Like he was waiting for something, but not for me, exactly. I glanced in the rearview mirror after I passed, but he stayed put, still watching. I kept driving, feeling a little uneasy, but tried to shrug it off. It's not uncommon to see people hitchhiking out there, after all. About 5 minutes later, maybe 8 miles down the road, I saw him again. Same spot, same posture, same hoodie, but same backpack. But this time, the weird part was that the road hadn't really curved or anything. It was just straight. Like I just passed him, and somehow he was back there, in the exact same spot, staring at me again. I slowed even more, eyes wide, trying to convince myself maybe it was someone else, like, I don't know, a twin or a copycat. But there was something about the way he stood, so still, so unnatural, that didn't feel right. I glanced down at my speedometer, still cruising at around 55 miles per hour. I remember thinking it couldn't have been the same guy. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on me. I shook my head and kept going. Then, about 20 minutes later, just past a curve near a small grove of trees, I saw him again. Same spot, or at least as close to the same spot as I could tell in the dark, standing there motionless, hoodie up, staring right at me. By then, I was pretty freaked out. I wasn't a superstitious guy or anything, but this was straight up weird. I couldn't explain how he'd ended up back on the side of the road after I'd already driven past twice. I slowed way down, almost to a stop. The air outside was crisp, and the headlights picked up a slight shimmer in the fog around him. It wasn't a shadow or a reflection, it was more like the air around him was vibrating. I'm not sure how to describe it exactly, but it looked like heat waves on a summer day, except it was cold out. I rolled down my window a bit, half expecting him to call out or move, but he didn't. Just stood there, staring. The feeling I got from him wasn't hostile, but it was heavy, like he was waiting for something that wasn't coming. For a moment, I considered stopping or even turning around to talk to him, but my gut told me not to. There was something off about this guy that didn't sit right. I sped up and passed him for the third and final time, watching him in my mirrors. He didn't move an inch. That's when the headlights flickered a couple times and the dashboard lights went dim. The radio cut out, replaced by static, and then just silence. The fog seemed to thicken instantly, swallowing the trees and the road beyond. I blinked and looked back. The figure was gone. Just empty roadside, wet grass glistening under the dim glow of the street lamp nearby. The weird part? I hadn't lost more than a few seconds. The trip continued like nothing had happened. No detours, no cars passing, no changes in the road. It was like the 3 sightings happened all at once, or maybe not at all. When I finally got home, I checked the car. No issues, everything normal. But that feeling stuck with me, like I'd seen something that shouldn't be real. I've driven that highway plenty of times before and since. Never saw anyone like that again. Sometimes I wonder if it was just exhaustion messing with me, but the details are too clear for that. The way he stood, the way he looked. I don't know what it was or why it happened, but it's something I think about more than I let on. I was about halfway through a 3-day solo hike in the Klamath Mountains, near where the Trinity River cuts through that rough, heavily forested part of Northern California. It was early October, the kind of time when the weather's still mild, but the days are getting shorter and the nights start to bite. I usually try to avoid popular trails, and this one was no exception. Thick trees, rugged terrain, almost nobody out there except me, my pack, and my dog, Juno. Juno's a husky mix, lean, quiet, and way smarter than me most days. She's always calm on the trail, but alert, ears twitching at every rustle. We set off late afternoon on the first day, aiming to camp near a ridge overlooking a valley I'd never seen before. I remember it was cloudy that evening, the kind of low gray cover that softens everything, makes shadows blur. The first weird thing happened maybe an hour before sunset. We'd stopped to rest by a little creek. Juno was sniffing around the bushes, probably chasing some squirrel or whatever, but then she suddenly froze. Not that usual dog alert freeze where they're ready to bolt or bark. This was different. She stood completely still, ears forward, eyes fixed on the ridge above us. No tail wag, no breathing changes, just dead still. I looked up, expecting to see maybe a deer or some other animal. Nothing. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds calling, no rustling in the underbrush. The kind of silence that makes you notice your own heartbeat. I called Juno to me, but she didn't move for a few seconds. Then slowly, like waking from a trance, she came over. That's when I noticed it. Out on the ridge, maybe 3 miles away, there was this weird orange glow. It wasn't bright or flashing, just a steady, low light. Kind of like a campfire, but not flickering, more like a soft, steady haze, about the size of a basketball held out at arm's length. The sun was almost gone behind the clouds, and the light looked unnatural, almost like it was hovering just above the tree line. I figured maybe it was a forest fire or something, but that didn't make sense. No smoke, no smell, nothing in the air. We kept watching for a few minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the orange glow faded away like it was turning off. Right at that moment, the birds started chirping again. The wind rustled the leaves, and Juno exhaled sharply and started wagging her tail. I shrugged it off as some weird light from a distant house or a reflection. Nothing you'd expect to think twice about in the middle of nowhere. But over the next few hours, it kept happening. Every now and then, the orange glow would pop up on the horizon. Sometimes near the ridge, sometimes lower, near the river valley. Always for a few seconds, never longer than 10 or 15, and always just fading away like it was never really there. Each time the glow showed up, everything around me, birds, squirrels, even the wind, would go completely silent and still. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. One time, I heard a hawk cry just before the glow appeared, and the sound cut off mid-call. I could swear the hawk stopped mid-flap and hovered for a moment, frozen in the air. I tried to get my phone out to take a picture, but I had no signal, and the screen kept glitching, flickering with lines like the battery was dying, even though it was fully charged. The weirdest part was Juno's reaction. Whenever the orange light came on, she'd stop whatever she was doing immediately, sit down, and stare straight toward the glow without blinking. Her body was rigid, almost tense. I felt a creeping sense of unease, but I kept moving forward. The last thing I wanted was to turn around in the middle of the first night. That night, I camped near a small clearing on the ridge. The air was cold and damp, and fog was rolling in from the valley below. I set up my tent, cooked a quick dinner, and sat outside, watching the stars try to peek through the clouds. Then, just after midnight, the orange glow showed up again. This time it was brighter, closer, and the whole clearing felt like it dimmed around me. Even the campfire flickered, like it was struggling against some invisible wind. Juno growled softly and moved closer to me. The glow lasted maybe 10 seconds before fading, and during that time, I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no night critters, not even the usual distant river noise. The silence was overwhelming. When the light vanished, sound slowly came back, and I noticed my watch had stopped. Not just paused or frozen, completely dead, like it had lost power. I checked my phone again. No signal, no apps working, screen dim. It was so strange I felt my skin tighten. The next morning, I found small patches of flattened grass in the clearing, like something had rested there recently. There were no footprints or animal tracks near the spots, and the ground was too hard for anything to have sunk in. Juno sniffed around the patches but stayed clear of them, avoiding those spots like they were toxic. As I packed up, I noticed the compass in my pack was spinning slowly, wobbling like a toy top instead of pointing north. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I kept hiking down toward the river valley, but the orange glow kept appearing at odd intervals, always on the horizon. Each time it came on, the forest froze. No animals moving, no breeze, just complete silence. I began to realize it wasn't just coincidence. Something about that light stopped all the wildlife around it. By the third day, I was tired and on edge. Juno refused to eat much and stayed glued to my side, which was unusual for her. I was hiking along a narrow ridge trail when the orange glow came up again, this time just as the sun was rising behind the mountains. I stopped and looked out. The glow was low, near a clump of dead trees I hadn't noticed before. It pulsed softly, lighting up the fog in waves. The birds were silent. The squirrels had vanished. Even the rustling of leaves stopped. I could feel a low hum in the air, not loud, but just enough to notice. It was weird, like the sound you get near an old electrical transformer, but constant and rhythmic. I pulled out my phone and tried to record the glow. The video started, but the image was distorted, colors shifting and bending unnaturally. The soundtrack was just static. Suddenly, Juno started growling low, her hackles raised. I turned around and caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping between the trees. It was too dark and fast to identify, but it didn't look like any animal I knew. I snapped my head back to the glow, and it was gone. The forest came back to life with birdsong and wind. I looked for the shadow, but it had vanished without a trace. I finished the hike and got home the next day, but something stayed with me. The orange glow, the frozen wildlife, the dead patches of grass, none of it fits anything normal. I've gone back through my photos and videos a dozen times, but the light always looks weird, like it's bending reality just a little. I told a couple friends who hike the area, but no one else has seen the glow or the silence. Juno still sometimes stares at the horizon at night, ears up, like she remembers something I don't. I don't know what it was or why it happened, but it left a quiet kind of weight in me, like the forest had paused to watch something it didn't want to name. And maybe so did I. I was hauling a load across eastern Oregon last September, the kind of trip where you spend most of your time staring at endless miles of nothing but sagebrush and dark hills. I'd been driving since noon and was somewhere past Baker City, out on Highway 395, when I started feeling that familiar pressure in my bladder. You get used to holding it for a while, but this time I figured I'd better stop before it became a real problem. There's this little rest area just off the highway, nothing fancy, mostly just a gravel parking lot and some porta potties. I pulled in around 10:30 at night. The place was empty except for a few parked rigs like mine, and a cooler night breeze had settled in after the heat of the day. The sky was clear, with a bright crescent moon hanging low over the ridge to the west. I shut off the engine, grabbed my flashlight and my old cap, and headed toward the restroom. My dog, Ranger, he's a tough-looking black and tan shepherd mix, was riding shotgun, so I clipped his leash to my belt and let him tag along. He's mostly calm, but likes sniffing around new spots. The porta potty was the usual metal box with that faint chemical smell. But what I noticed right away was how dead quiet it was. No bugs, no wind rustling the dry grass nearby. Just this eerie stillness that felt out of place. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just one of those nights. I finished up, zipped my jacket, and turned to head back to the truck. That's when I caught it out of the corner of my eye. Above the line of trees on the ridge, maybe 100 feet up or so, was this disc-shaped object. Just hanging there, motionless. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet across, perfectly round and smooth. The surface reflected the moonlight like it was polished metal, but it wasn't shining or blinking lights like a plane or a drone would. It just sat there like someone had placed it there and forgot to turn it off. I stopped dead, frozen for a second. Ranger's ears perked up, and he pulled a little on the leash, growling softly. I looked back at the object, half expecting it to vanish or move away. Instead, it just hovered silently, casting a faint shadow over the treetops. There was no noise, no hum, no engine sound. The night was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I scanned the area around it, thinking maybe it was some kind of weird weather balloon or a blimp, but nothing made sense. It was too low for a balloon, and the shape was way too perfect. I pulled out my phone to snap a picture, but the screen was glitching. The camera app kept freezing and crashing like the battery was dying fast, even though it was nearly full. Ranger whined again, more urgently this time. I didn't want to stare any longer, so I slowly backed toward the truck, keeping my eyes on the object. After maybe a minute or two, it began to fade, the reflected moonlight dimming until it disappeared altogether, just like that. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 minutes at most. But when I got back into the cab, I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right. Ranger was quiet but tense, sitting rigidly in his seat. I called the dispatcher to check if anyone else had reported strange lights or anything unusual on the route. The guy on the line laughed it off, said I was probably just tired or seeing things after hours on the road. I drove the rest of the way without incident, but the image of that disc stayed with me. I kept replaying it in my head, how it looked so deliberate and still, like it was watching or waiting. A couple of nights later, I was back in the same area, but this time it was foggy and cold. I stopped at the same rest area again, mostly out of habit. Ranger and I got out to stretch, and I tried to look for the spot where I'd seen the disc, but the trees were just shadows in the mist. That's when I noticed my phone started acting weird again. The GPS kept jumping around, showing me several routes that didn't exist and losing signal entirely. Ranger suddenly tensed up again, ears pinned back, staring into the fog. Then, from the tree line, a low, soft glow appeared. Nothing like the disc, just a pale blue light flickering between the trunks. It wasn't bright enough to light up the area, but enough to catch my eye. The light pulsed twice, then vanished as quietly as it appeared. I grabbed Ranger and jumped back into the truck, heart pounding. I didn't want to hang around to see if anything else showed up. Since then, I haven't gone back to that rest area at night. The disc-shaped thing, the weird glitches, and the strange lights feel like pieces of the same puzzle I don't have the key for. I've told a couple of close friends, but most just shrug and say it sounds like fatigue or tricks of the night. But I know what I saw, and I know Ranger's never acted like that before. There's something out there, somewhere just beyond the tree line, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I was flying a routine cargo run out of Boise one late October evening. Nothing out of the ordinary had come up all day, just the usual slow grind of loading, pre-flight checks, and the monotony of pushing the throttle forward to climb out over the mountains. I was flying a small twin-engine turboprop, a Cessna 441. Nothing fancy, but it got the job done. The weather was clear, a crisp fall night with a thin crescent moon hanging low, just enough light to outline the peaks below. I'd reached cruising altitude around 9,000 feet, and the only company on the radio was ATC, keeping it light since the airspace wasn't busy that late. My co-pilot, Joe, had just taken over for a quick break in the cockpit, and I leaned back in my seat, staring out the window at the endless black sky sprinkled with stars. About 30 minutes into the flight, I noticed something strange out the left side window. At first, I thought it was just a cluster of stars or some distant city lights, but the shapes moved, too deliberate to be anything natural. I rubbed my eyes and focused. There were 4 lights arranged in a loose diamond formation darting across the sky. The weird part was how they moved. Not the smooth arcs or steady course of planes, but quick zigzag motions, sharp turns that didn't make sense aerodynamically. I called Joe over quietly. "Hey, look at that." He squinted, adjusting his headset, and nodded. We both watched as the lights shifted left, then right, moving in ways no conventional aircraft would. The lights stayed roughly the same size, which meant they weren't planes far off in the distance. They didn't blink or flash the typical navigation lights either, just steady, bright dots. Curious, I keyed the mic to ask ATC if there were any other flights in the area. "Center. This is Falcon 57. Do you have any traffic at our 12 o'clock about 5 miles out?" A brief pause, then the voice came back calm and firm. "Falcon 57, negative. No other traffic in your vicinity. No radar contacts except you and your co-pilot. Are you visual on the traffic?" I hesitated, then said, "Affirmative. 4 lights moving in an unusual pattern, not responding to conventional flight rules." "Roger that. No other known aircraft in the area," ATC replied. I glanced back at Joe. He looked as uneasy as I felt. We had both flown enough night cargo runs not to be easily rattled. But this was something else. The lights suddenly stopped, hovering in place for what felt like a solid minute. Then, without warning, they zipped up and away, shooting straight up toward the edge of the atmosphere faster than anything I'd ever seen. The climb wasn't smooth, more like they flicked a switch and disappeared into the stars. We were silent for a moment, then I called ATC again, but there was no response. I toggled the radio, but it was dead. No static, no crackling, just silence. I checked all the comm switches, but everything was normal. After a tense few seconds, the radio suddenly popped back on. "Falcon 57, you there? We had a brief comms glitch, sorry about that." I nodded even though they couldn't see me. "Copy that. No other traffic?" "Negative. You're the only blip on radar in this sector." I kept watching the sky, but the lights were gone, no trace left. A few minutes later, Joe swore he saw something gliding just below cloud level on the right side, a dark shape moving silently against the faint glow of the moon. I turned to look, but whatever it was vanished before I could get a good look. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but the feeling of being watched lingered. When we landed, I checked the official flight logs and radar tapes later with the company's operations center. Nothing showed up, no unknown aircraft, no radar anomalies, nothing. Since then, I've gone back over every detail 100 times. The zigzag patterns, the silent disappearance, the radio glitch. It wasn't fatigue or a hallucination. Joe saw it too, and so did ATC confirm no traffic. I don't know what those lights were, but they definitely weren't planes, and they weren't satellites or weather balloons either. Just 4 moving points of light performing maneuvers that defied everything I know about flight. Sometimes I catch myself looking up at the night sky on a clear evening, wondering if they'll show up again. I was doing my usual rounds out near Coldwater Marsh, one of those places most people don't think twice about unless they're looking to fish or birdwatch. It's a quiet patch of wetlands about 20 miles northeast of the park headquarters, mostly dense reeds, muddy water, and the occasional dirt trail that snakes through the brush. I was alone that morning. My partner Kyle had the day off, and it was foggy, thick enough that I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. My job was mostly checking traps, making sure the boundaries were clear, and keeping an eye on poachers or lost hikers. The fog made everything feel slower, quieter, like the world had muted itself. I'd parked my truck on the dirt road near the marsh edge around 7:30 a.m. and had been walking the perimeter for a couple of hours. My dog, Luna, was with me, a big mutt with a brindle coat and way too much energy for early mornings. She'd been sniffing around like usual, poking her nose into every puddle and root she could find. Then, about halfway through the second loop, something caught my eye. Muddy prints, leading right off the trail and straight into the marsh grass. I knelt down to get a closer look. The footprints were definitely human in shape, 5 toes, a clear arch, but they were enormous, at least twice the size of a normal adult male's prints. I swear the sole was nearly a foot long. I called Luna back and stood up, brushing mud off my pants. The prints went in a line, spaced out evenly, like someone was walking slowly and deliberately. The thing was, they stopped abruptly about 15 feet into the marsh itself. No sign of disturbance beyond that point. No way through the thick reeds and soggy muck. It was like the person, or whatever it was, had just vanished. I took out my phone to snap some pictures, but fog was messing with the camera focus. The images were grainy and washed out. Still, I sent a couple to the park office for records with a quick note. I figured maybe it was some local fisherman or someone clumsy who'd wandered in, but the size of the prints threw me off. No one in this part of the county was that big, and the prints were fresh enough that they couldn't be from weeks ago. Luna started growling low in her throat, looking toward the marsh where the prints ended. I tried to ignore it and called her off, but she kept staring, stiff-legged and tense. I wanted to move on, tell myself it was just a weird anomaly. But something about the quiet there made my skin crawl. The fog seemed thicker near the marsh, like it was swallowing up sound and light. I stood still for a minute, and I swear I heard the faintest splash way off to my left, maybe 50 yards into the reeds. But when I looked, there was nothing. Just a still patch of water and waving grasses. I started walking back toward the truck, keeping Luna close. My boots sank into the mud with every step, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling eyes on me. Nothing visible, but that feeling stayed, like I wasn't alone. By the time I got back, the sun had burned off some of the fog, but the marsh still looked like a ghost town. The air smelled damp and heavy. I told Kyle about the footprints later, and he joked that maybe Bigfoot had taken a day off and wandered through. I laughed it off too, but deep down I wasn't sure what else to say. The next day, I went back with a small crew to look for more tracks or any other signs. We found nothing. The marsh was quiet. The water still, no prints or broken branches beyond what I'd seen. That night at home, Luna wouldn't stop pacing by the back door. She stared out into the dark like something was waiting there, just beyond the edge of the yard. I checked the security cameras. Nothing. No people, no animals. A few days later, I was going through the photos again, zooming in on the footprints. I noticed something weird I hadn't seen before, a faint second set of smaller prints inside the larger ones, almost like someone was stepping directly into those giant footprints. But when I looked closer, the smaller prints were off. The toes were too long and thin, like they belonged to something else entirely. I tried showing the pictures to some local wildlife experts and even the county sheriff, but no one had a good explanation. They said maybe an animal had messed with the prints or something, but none of it fit right. I stopped going near Coldwater Marsh for a while after that. The fog, the quiet, those prints all felt like pieces of something I couldn't put together. Last week, Luna started barking at the window again, the same tense, locked-on kind of bark. When I looked outside, there was nothing but the empty yard and a low mist rolling in. I swear, for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the trees. I don't know what I saw out there, or what made those prints in the mud, but whatever it wasn't human, and it didn't leave. I camp alone a lot, mostly up in the sawtooths when work's slow. I run deliveries out of Boise and pick my own hours, so sometimes I'll take a weekday and head into the hills just to be away from pavement and voices for a bit. No big hikes or anything. Just a tent, my pack, and my dog, Winslow. He's a shepherd mix, real smart, real chill, doesn't bark unless it matters. This happened last September. I'd gone up Tuesday morning and parked at a pull-off off Forest Road 212, about 4 miles past where it turns to gravel. There's a little creek down a ravine and a flat patch next to it where I've pitched a tent maybe half a dozen times. Cell signal dies about 10 minutes past the trailhead, which is exactly why I like it. That night was cool, but not cold. Clear skies, no wind. I'd brought freeze-dried stew and my little cook pot, and Winslow and I ate by the fire. Around 10, I doused it and crawled into the tent. He curled up by the door like he always does. I remember checking the time before I crashed. It was 10:14. Phone battery was at 82%. The next thing I remember clearly is unzipping the tent just after sunrise. Winslow was already sitting up, real alert. Ears forward, not tense exactly, but focused. He stepped out ahead of me and stared off toward the tree line like he'd heard something. I didn't hear anything. I stepped out, stretched, took a leak behind a log, felt normal. Cold dew, birds, distant wind, everything looked how I left it, except the fire pit. I always scatter the coals with water and ash, but that morning the rocks around it looked wrong, like someone had moved them slightly and put them back. There were wet streaks on 2 of the stones, not from dew, more like smears. I knelt and touched one. It wasn't warm or anything, just odd. Off-center from how I'd arranged it. I didn't think too much of it right then. Figured maybe I'd just not been as precise as I remembered. I went to grab my phone to check the time again. It was off. That surprised me. I hit the button, nothing. Dead screen. I held power. Still nothing. I carry a battery bank and a solar panel for longer trips, but this was just an overnighter, so I hadn't packed one. I figured maybe it had glitched, or the cold drained it. Annoying, but not a crisis. I made coffee and sat by the creek while Winslow sniffed around the brush, still acting a little stiff. Not scared, just cautious. He didn't range far. I packed up around 9, rolled the tent, lashed it up, double-checked I hadn't left anything. The only thing that kept tugging at me was the fire pit, but again, I chalked it up to my own memory. It wasn't until I got home, 2 hours later, after getting back in range, that things really started to bother me. I plugged my phone in and it powered up fine. No low battery warning, just booted like normal, but instead of 82%, it showed 78%, which made no sense. It should have dropped, not gone up. I unlocked it. Everything looked normal, until I opened my camera roll. There were 57 new photos, all taken between 1:12 and 3:40 a.m. They were all from inside the tent. Every single one was blurry, like motion blur, low light, shaky hand type of blurry. Some were just dark shapes, walls of the tent, sleeping bag fabric, shadows. Others had faint glows as like light coming through the nylon from outside. A few had what looked like a hand, too close to the lens, pale and out of focus, like someone brushing against it. None of them were clear. None had me in them. Just shapes, parts of Winslow's body, his side, his tail, nothing direct. The last photo, timestamped 3:40, was the only one not completely smeared. It showed the zipper flap, partly open, a sliver of darkness beyond it, and what looked like something smooth and round, maybe the size of a melon, just outside. Too dark to tell. Could have been a rock. Could have been a face. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch and looked through the pictures over and over, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I showed a couple to my friend Eli, who's into photography. He said it looked like someone was fumbling with the phone in the dark, trying to take pictures without knowing how it worked. The angles were weird, like it was flat on the ground half the time, pointed up. I asked if he thought I took them in my sleep. He just looked at me and said, "Why would you open your tent at 3 a.m? I didn't have an answer. 2 days later, I went back to that spot during daylight just to check. I took Winslow and brought a friend this time. We didn't camp, just hiked in, looked around, didn't find anything unusual. But about 50 yards up the slope from where I'd pitched the tent, we found a line of indentations in the moss. 5 or 6 of them, maybe 1.5 feet apart. Not deep, not shaped like boot prints, more like pressure points. Narrow, evenly spaced, almost too even. Winslow sniffed them and backed off. Didn't growl, didn't bark, just turned around and walked back toward the trail. That was enough for me. I don't camp alone anymore. I'd gotten to the trailhead late in the morning. It was one of those dry, clear spring days where the sun is out, but the breeze is still cold enough to keep you zipped up. This was in the Bitterroot Range, just north of Darby, Montana. I'd done that trail once before with my cousin back in the fall, but this time I wanted to be alone. I brought my pack, a little food, and my dog, Keely, a scrappy mutt with big ears and a bad attitude towards squirrels. We were maybe 4 miles in when I first noticed it. We'd stopped so I could drink some water and check the map. Keely was pawing at something in the brush. I looked up to scan the ridgeline, and that's when I saw a glint. Something bright, up above the tree line, but lower than the clouds. At first, I thought it was a drone or maybe a plane banking in the sun, but it didn't move. I watched it for a minute. It wasn't spinning or flashing, just a pinpoint reflection, like sunlight bouncing off metal. High up, but not high enough to be a plane. It felt close. The wind was picking up by then. Clouds were getting shoved across the sky fast, and tree branches were swaying pretty hard, but the glint stayed still, just hung there. Keely started growling, soft at first. I turned around and saw her staring straight up, hackles up. That wasn't like her. She usually only did that for deer or big birds. I knelt next to her and tried to distract her with some jerky, but she wouldn't take it. She just kept staring, low growl in her throat, like she was waiting for something to come down. I stood up and looked again. The glint hadn't moved. We kept hiking. I figured I'd just keep an eye on it. Probably a weather balloon or some weird lens flare. Every time we stopped, I checked. Still there. No sound. No shift. Even when a gust of wind made the pine trees sway hard enough to creak, that thing didn't budge. Around mile 6, we came into a clearing with a big flat rock I remembered from last time. I let Keely off leash and sat down to eat. The sky had cleared up a little, sun was cutting through, but the wind hadn't died. I looked up again. Still there. I tried to get a photo of it, but my phone wouldn't focus. It either blurred or adjusted for the brightness and wiped out the sky. I gave up after a few tries. Keely wouldn't sit still. She kept circling me, sniffing the air. Then she stopped and faced the tree line on the far side of the clearing, completely stiff, tail low. I called her, but she didn't move. I stood up. The wind died suddenly, like flipping a switch. No gradual easing, just gone. The silence was thick. No birds, no branches, not even the buzzing of flies. I walked toward Keely slowly, and that's when she bolted, straight into the trees, not toward anything I could see, just gone. I shouted for her. Waited. Nothing. I called again. Still nothing. I couldn't hear her tags, her paws, anything. Just quiet. I ran after her. Maybe 50 feet into the woods, the air felt colder. Not just shade cold, like fridge cold. My skin prickled. I stopped and called again, louder this time. Then I heard something. Not Keely. Something else. A soft clicking, not almost like two stones tapping together. Repetitive. Slow. I turned toward the sound, but I couldn't pinpoint it. It seemed to come from above me. I looked up through the branches, and the glint was still there, but closer. Bigger now. Less like a spot, more like a shape. Not round, not sharp. Something in between. Hard to focus on. I felt a pressure in my ears like going up in altitude. My nose started to sting. The clicking stopped. I took a few steps back, then turned around and walked fast toward the clearing, yelling for Keely the whole way. When I broke through the tree line, the wind started again, just as suddenly as it had stopped. Full force. Branches swaying, sound returning. And Keely was there, standing in the exact spot she'd bolted from, staring at me. Her ears were back, and her legs were shaking. I ran to her. She didn't run, didn't bark, just stood there like she'd been frozen in place. Her collar was missing. I clipped the spare leash from my pack onto her harness and started back down the trail. No more breaks, no more food. I didn't even drink. I just wanted to get back to the car. The whole way down, I kept glancing up. The glint stayed with us behind the trees, never in the same spot twice, but always there, like it was pacing us. At one point, Keely stopped again and growled low, but this time she didn't bolt. She just crouched low to the ground, eyes locked on something I couldn't see. I didn't look. I didn't want to. The last half mile, we jogged. My legs were aching and I could barely breathe, but I didn't stop. The second I saw my car through the trees, I felt this weight lift off my chest. I unlocked the door, shoved Keely into the back seat, and slammed it shut. When I got in, I didn't even start the engine right away. I just sat there, trying to listen, trying to hear anything besides my own pulse in my ears. Eventually, I looked up through the windshield. Nothing. The sky was empty, clear, like nothing had been there at all. I drove straight home, didn't stop, didn't talk to anyone. The next day, Keely wouldn't eat. She wouldn't go outside either. Just sat by the back door and stared up through the window. She still won't wear a collar. I've tried 3 different kinds. She panics every time, shakes and whines until I take it off. I checked the map later, trying to find the clearing on satellite. Couldn't. The trail looked normal, but there was no sign of that flat rock or open patch I'd eaten lunch in. It's like it wasn't there, or it got covered up, or I was never there in the first place. I was out walking my dog a quiet Tuesday evening about a week ago. The sky was clear but not completely dark yet. You know, that grayish blue you get right after sunset. The kind of evening where the air feels just a little chilly, but not enough to need a jacket. I live on the edge of a small town, nothing fancy, mostly houses with big yards and a few patches of woods nearby. My dog, a lanky black lab named Ollie, was dragging me down the street like usual, had sniffing everything and pulling toward the park at the end of the block. We were halfway down the sidewalk when I noticed a plane in the sky. It caught my eye because it wasn't moving like a normal plane. I watch planes sometimes, just out of curiosity. I'm not an expert or anything, but I grew up near an airport and spent some weekends as a kid watching planes land and take off. This one was way off course, though. It was heading toward the southwest, which didn't make any sense given the usual flight paths out of the regional airport a few miles east of here. At first, I thought it was just a small private plane, maybe a crop duster or something old school flying low. The wings looked normal from where I was, and I could see the blinking red and green lights on either side. But as I kept watching, it didn't keep moving in a straight line. It was veering off sharply, like it was struggling to stay steady, maybe caught in some kind of turbulence. I thought maybe the pilot was in trouble or there was some kind of emergency. But then something else happened that didn't add up. Instead of continuing the erratic zigzag, the plane suddenly pointed straight up, like it just rotated its nose toward the sky. And then it shot upward. I mean, it went vertical. Fast. I blinked a couple of times, figuring maybe I was seeing things wrong, or maybe the angle made it look like it was going straight up, but it wasn't. The weird part, there was no sound. Not a thing. Usually, even a small plane climbing fast leaves some kind of engine noise, especially when it's close enough to see the flashing lights. But this was completely silent, like it vanished. And I don't mean it just disappeared because it went out of sight behind clouds or over the horizon. It accelerated so fast upward that it was gone in seconds, not just out of view, but gone. No contrail, no exhaust, no light flare or trail behind it, just gone. I stood there with Ollie pulling on the leash, looking straight up where it had been, but the sky was empty. No sound, no movement, just quiet. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or dreaming, but Ollie was tugging me forward, like he sensed something was off too. He kept looking back up at the spot where the plane had vanished, ears perked, body stiff. It felt like he didn't want to leave, but also didn't want to stay. We kept walking toward the park. I was feeling weird, kind of cold even though the air wasn't that chilly anymore. I glanced at my phone, and the time was 7:14 p.m. I didn't mention the plane to anyone right away. It felt dumb, like I was making it up in my head. Later that night, I looked up the flight schedules for the regional airport. There were no reports of any plane taking off or flying over our neighborhood around that time. No flights at all matching the description. I even checked with flight tracking apps, and nothing unusual came up. The next day, I told my friend Marco, who's into aviation, what I saw. He was skeptical, but agreed it sounded strange. He said maybe it was a drone, but I told him no way. This thing was way bigger than any drone I'd ever seen. The lights, the shape, the way it moved. it was a real plane or something like it. Over the next few days, I kept looking up at the sky, hoping to see something else. Nothing. But there were other weird things. For example, Ollie started acting strange. He used to be pretty chill on walks, sniff around, maybe bark at squirrels. But after that night, he kept stopping and staring at nothing in the trees or across empty fields. Sometimes he'd growl low and tuck his tail, like he saw something I didn't. It made me uneasy. One morning, I found him standing stiff in the backyard, staring at the sky for a solid 5 minutes. No birds, no planes, just empty gray clouds. I snapped a photo of him with my phone just because it felt off. He looked like he was watching something. That same morning, I noticed my car had a new dent on the roof. No idea how it got there. I'm usually careful parking in the driveway, and no one else has access to the yard. There was no branch or anything overhead that could have fallen. The dent was small, but definitely not there before. I tried to shrug it off, thinking it was nothing, but with everything else, it felt connected. A couple nights later, I was lying in bed when I heard a faint buzzing outside. Not like an insect, more like a distant generator or maybe a low-frequency hum. It lasted a few minutes and then just stopped. When I looked outside, there was nothing unusual, no lights, no movement, just dark. The whole experience felt like something trying to catch my attention, but not letting on what or why. I never told the police or anyone official. I don't want to get laughed at. And honestly, I'm not sure I want answers. The way that plane moved and disappeared, it's stuck with me. It doesn't fit with anything I know about physics or planes. I still walk Ollie every evening, hoping maybe I'll see something else. But the sky stays quiet now, just normal planes, normal stars. Sometimes I catch myself looking up, waiting for that impossible climb straight up, silent and vanishing, but it hasn't come back. I woke up with a dry mouth and a stiff neck, blinking into the dim light of my car's interior. It took a moment to realize I was sitting in the driver's seat of my old Honda, parked on the shoulder of a 2-lane road. The streetlights were sparse, and the trees on either side pressed in close, their dark shapes flickering with the weak glow of the passing headlights from distant cars. My head throbbed a little, and the clock on the dash read 3:17 a.m. I didn't know how I got there. The last clear thing I remembered was turning off the TV in my apartment, somewhere around midnight. I'd been watching some old crime documentary, planning to go to bed soon after. Then nothing. No drive, no memory of getting in the car or pulling off the highway. I even had the engine off, keys in the ignition, but no recollection of starting the car or why I was out here in the middle of nowhere. I fumbled for my phone on the passenger seat. The screen lit up, but the battery was at 3%. No missed calls, no messages. The last app I had open was a podcast I'd been listening to while trying to fall asleep. No clues there. My dog, a scrappy terrier mix named Lila, was curled up on the floor behind the seats, snoring softly. She usually sleeps through anything, but her little ears twitched as I moved. I reached back and scratched her behind the ears. She looked up at me, tired but calm. I tried to piece it together. Maybe I'd driven here intentionally and forgotten. No, that didn't make sense. I'm pretty careful with driving, especially at night, and there wasn't a damn thing around for miles except this stretch of road surrounded by dense woods. The air outside smelled damp, like the rain had just stopped or was about to start. The windshield had small streaks of moisture. I rolled down the window a bit, and the cold night air hit my face, sharp and fresh. The road was empty, quiet except for the faint rustling of leaves. I stepped out, wanting to clear my head. Lila followed, patting silently on the gravel. The silence out here wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, like the kind of quiet that waits for something. I looked around but didn't see any houses or signs of life, just the dark line of trees and the road stretching in both directions. No cars had passed by for at least 10 minutes. I took a few steps down the shoulder, trying to get my bearings. Then I noticed it, a faint light flickering between the trees maybe a quarter mile down the road. At first, I thought it was a campfire, but the light wasn't steady or warm. It was cold, pale, almost bluish, and it didn't move or spread like a fire would. It stayed fixed, almost like a spotlight shining somewhere deep in the woods. I felt my skin prickling. I'm not the kind to scare easily, but something about that light was wrong. I called softly to Lila, but she just sat down, looking at me as if she wanted me to get back in the car. I debated whether to get closer or just drive away, but the engine was dead and my phone was dying. I figured I might as well try to walk toward the light for a bit. Maybe it was someone stranded, a hiker, or something I could help with. The gravel crunched under my boots as I moved toward the trees. The light didn't change or flicker more. It just glowed steadily, illuminating some of the lower branches and casting long shadows. The air grew cooler, and I noticed a faint buzzing sound. Not mechanical, but like the hum of electricity, or maybe insects, but deeper and more constant. I reached the edge of the tree line and peered in, but the dense woods swallowed the light quickly. I couldn't see anyone or anything moving. I called out quietly, "Hello?" No answer. I felt suddenly aware of how alone I was. The road was too far behind me, the car just a tiny speck. The trees leaned inward, making the woods feel like a tunnel. The buzzing got louder, but it didn't seem to come from one place. It filled the air around me. I thought about turning back, but before I did, I heard something else. A soft crunching, like footsteps on dead leaves. I froze, heart jumping. I spun around, but nothing was there. Just trees and shadows. Lila barked sharply, a low growl under it. She moved closer to me, tail down, fur bristling. I called her name and pulled her in tight. Then, without warning, the buzzing stopped. The cold light vanished too, like someone had flipped a switch. Darkness fell instantly, thick and heavy. I fumbled for my phone and managed to turn on the flashlight. The beam sliced through the black, but it only showed trees and empty space. I didn't hear footsteps anymore. Lila was trembling slightly at my feet. I started back toward the car, moving fast but careful. Every crackle of twigs underfoot sounded way too loud. The feeling of being watched was unbearable. I kept glancing behind but saw nothing but shadows. When I finally reached the road, the streetlight flickered above me, casting an orange glow. My car was right there, exactly where I left it, and as I climbed in, the engine suddenly turned over. I don't remember turning it on. I started the car and drove home as fast as I dared, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. The whole way, the buzzing stayed in my ears, faint but there, like it was stuck inside my head. When I got home, I checked the clock on my kitchen stove. It was 3:45 a.m. I'd only been gone about half an hour, according to that. But the way I felt, tired, rattled, was like I'd been somewhere else entirely. Since that night, things have been off. Lila won't go near the woods, no matter how much I coax her. Lights in the house flicker sometimes when there's no wind or storm. My phone's GPS glitches, showing me places I've never been. I still don't know what that light was, or why I ended up out there in the first place. But I'm sure of one thing. Whatever it was, it wanted me to see it, and it wasn't done with me yet. We were camping up near Spruce Ridge, just the two of us and the dog. It was mid-September, right when the leaves were starting to change and the nights had that cold bite to them. We'd taken the trail off Forest Road 18, hiked in about a mile, and set up camp near a clearing that backed up to a thick stretch of pine. No one else was around. It was a weekday, and the air was crisp and quiet. Perfect weather. Her name's Dana. We've been together 8 years. The dog's name is Lupin. He's a mutt, some cattle dog in there, maybe some husky. Smart, twitchy, always alert. We take him on every trip. The first night was normal. We cooked over the fire, had a couple beers, watched the stars. You don't get skies like that near town. No clouds, just a wide black bowl full of stars, clearer than I'd seen in a long time. Lupin wandered the perimeter like usual, sniffing around, but nothing weird. We turned in around 11. Sometime deep in the night, I half woke and heard something walking just outside the tent. A soft, deliberate stepping. Definitely bipedal. I figured it was a deer at first. We've had them come up close before. But the steps stopped right at the back of the tent and didn't move for a long time. I didn't say anything. Dana was breathing slow beside me. Totally out. Eventually, it moved away, quietly, not crashing through the underbrush like a deer would. More like someone walking barefoot on leaves. I lay there listening until I fell back asleep. The second night is when it happened. We'd spent the day hiking, Went out to a lookout spot about 4 miles west, took some photos. Lupin chased a squirrel for like an hour. We got back to camp around 6, made dinner, and got in the tent early, maybe 9:30. It had dropped into the low 40s, and the cold just makes you want to curl up and sleep. I woke up first around 3 a.m. I remember the time because I checked my phone. The buzzing sound is what pulled me out of sleep. It wasn't like a bee or anything natural. It was deeper. Mechanical, but not loud. It had this layered quality, like several tones stacked together. I'd never heard anything like it. Lupin was already up, crouched low at the tent door. Not barking. He never barked unless someone knocked at the house, but his whole body was tense, head low, ears flattened. Dana was stirring behind me. I unzipped the tent slowly. The buzzing was louder outside, coming from somewhere past the clearing, maybe toward the trail we came in on. The sky was clear again, moon hanging low and yellow. I looked around for movement, but didn't see anything. Trees were still, no wind. Lupin didn't bolt out like he usually does. He just stayed in the doorway, staring hard into the trees. That's when I looked over at the car. We'd parked it just off the trail, 20 yards from the tent, front-facing toward the woods like always. But it wasn't facing that way anymore. It was turned around, exactly 180 degrees. The back bumper was now facing the woods, headlights pointed back the way we came in. Like someone had lifted it and spun it. No tire tracks, no ruts, no churned-up dirt. Just the same dry, packed earth. I just stood there for a while. I couldn't make sense of it. The car was an old Subaru Outback, weighed over 3,000 pounds. There was no way it could have been rolled or pushed without waking us up, and nothing about the ground looked disturbed. I even checked the pine needles. They weren't scattered or brushed aside like you'd expect if someone had maneuvered a vehicle. Dana came out behind me and saw where I was looking. She said, "Why'd you turn the car around?" I told her I didn't. She went quiet. The buzzing was still going, off in the distance. I couldn't tell if it was getting closer or just vibrating through the trees. It felt like it was everywhere at once, but also far away. Then, all at once, it stopped. No fade out, just gone. The air felt weird after that, too quiet. No night sounds, no wind, no distant owls. Even Lupin stopped panting. He just sat back on his haunches, staring at the tree line. We didn't go back in the tent right away. Just stood there, watching, like we expected something to come out of the woods. But nothing did. Eventually, Dana said she was too cold to stand out there anymore, and we got back inside. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She must have drifted off, but I kept listening. I didn't hear the buzzing again, but once, maybe around 5, I thought I heard a single sharp crack, like a branch snapping way out past the ridge. Then nothing. At first light, we packed up. Neither of us said much. Lupin wouldn't get in the car. He stood with his paws dug in and whined, something he hadn't done since he was a puppy. I had to lift him in. When I turned the ignition, everything worked fine. No warning lights, no dead battery. I checked the dash clock. It was 5 minutes slow. Could have been from the cold, could have just been wrong. I don't know. We drove out and didn't speak again until we were back on pavement. Later at home, I checked under the car for damage or signs of tampering. Nothing. No scratches, no bent parts, no oil leaks. The tires looked untouched, not even dust displaced. I haven't been back to that spot since. Dana hasn't brought it up once, and Lupin refuses to get near the hatchback. We've had to start letting him ride in the back seat. I worked the night shift as a security guard at an old, mostly empty office park just outside Tulsa. The place had a few small businesses left in it, but the majority of the complex was abandoned. The buildings were the kind that felt like they hadn't changed much since the 80s, with dusty carpets and flickering fluorescent lights. My job was simple: patrol the grounds, keep an eye on the entrances, and monitor the cameras from the security office. The night I'm about to tell you about started like any other. It was early November, a dry, chilly evening with a thin layer of fog settling in around midnight. The air was still, the kind that makes you notice every little sound. I had my usual setup: a cup of lukewarm coffee, a box of donuts I wasn't proud of, and the drone camera system they'd recently installed for outside surveillance. It was supposed to be top of the line with thermal imaging and motion tracking. Around 2:30 a.m., while I was flipping through the camera feeds, I caught something odd on the rooftop of Building C, the biggest and oldest structure in the park. At first, it looked like a shadow moving slowly along the edge, but then I saw the footsteps. That's the thing about footsteps on a roof at night. They sound wrong. They're muffled, but the rhythm is clear. Slow, deliberate steps pacing back and forth. I knew the building was locked up tight, and there was no scheduled maintenance or workers around that night. I called the main office number, but no answer. I even tried the intercom system from the security room, but it was dead. The drone camera feed gave me no real picture of a person, though. It showed only a weird flickering distortion where the footsteps should have been. Like the air itself was glitching or shimmering, and every time the footsteps moved, the flicker shifted with it, but no figure ever fully formed. I'm not someone to freak out easily, but this felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside, checking the perimeter on foot. The lot was empty, except for a few old cars left over from the businesses still operating. No one was around, no noises other than the distant hum of the highway. When I looked up at the roof, nothing was there. No footprints in the thin layer of frost that had settled on the gravel, no shadows, nothing out of place. I even climbed the fire escape halfway up the side of the building and scanned the roof with my flashlight. Just empty, cold tar and gravel. I went back inside thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. But the footsteps came back, louder this time, slow and steady. The drone camera picked up the flickering again, right above the main entrance where the roof juts out slightly. I kept watching, trying to make sense of it. Then the footsteps stopped. The flickering paused too, frozen in one spot like a bad TV signal. That's when I felt it. A low vibration in the air, like static electricity, but deeper, heavier. It pressed against my skin, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop watching the screen. The flicker grew brighter, more intense, and then it suddenly pulsed like a ripple through water. For a second, I thought I saw a shape, maybe a shadow or a figure, but it was gone before I could be sure. I radioed the night manager. No answer. I called the local PD just to check if they had any reports of trespassers or vandals. Nothing. I stayed inside the security office for the rest of the shift, eyes glued to the screens. The footsteps never returned, but the flickering on the drone feed would come and go. Sometimes it was barely noticeable, just a tiny shimmer in the corner of the frame. Other times it spread wider, pulsing gently like breathing. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I packed up and left without looking back. The fog was lifting as the sun started to rise, and the place looked just like it always did, quiet and empty. I checked the footage later at home. The drone videos showed the flickering clearly, but never a person. No clear images, no clues. I've told a few coworkers, but they think I'm imagining things or that it was some kind of glitch in the system. Maybe it was, but I still think about that vibration in the air, the way the flicker moved and the footsteps that never had a source. I haven't gone back to that job since. Sometimes when it's quiet and I catch a glimpse of static on my TV or computer screen, I wonder if whatever was up there is still watching, just beyond the edges of what we can see. I was out hiking with my buddy Jesse on a trail in the Mark Twain National Forest, somewhere in southern Missouri. It was early October, right after the leaves had started turning, so the woods were full of those reds and oranges, but the air was already crisp and cool, the kind that makes your breath visible when you exhale. We set out in the late afternoon, hoping to get a good chunk of the trail done before dark. Jesse's dog, a lanky mutt named Ollie, with ears that always flopped over one eye, was bouncing around, excited to be out. We were both into hiking, but usually stuck to the more popular spots. This trail was less traveled, so it felt quiet and kind of empty in a good way. Just the crunch of leaves underfoot, Ollie sniffing every inch of the ground, the occasional distant bird call. We didn't have any cell service out there, which was fine. We wanted to get away from the noise. We had headlamps in our packs, but figured we'd be back before dark. About an hour into the hike, we stopped to catch our breath on a little clearing. That's when Jesse noticed something strange. Off to the northeast, somewhere deeper in the forest, there were these lights. At first, I thought it was someone's campfire, but the lights weren't flickering like a fire. They were different. They sat low, like just above the ground, or maybe on the trunks of the trees. There were 5 of them, spaced out evenly in a sort of curve. Each light was a solid color, but here's the weird part. They changed colors, one after the other, in a smooth sequence. Blue would fade to green, then to red, then yellow, and finally a soft purple, before cycling back to blue. Jesse and I just stood there, watching, both of us quiet. The lights weren't moving up into the sky or anything. They seemed fixed in place, but inside the trees, like they were hanging from branches or glowing from within the trunks. It was getting dark fast, but the lights stood out sharply in the twilight. Ollie suddenly stopped sniffing and stared in that direction too, tail stiff, low growl barely audible. Jesse whispered, "That's gotta be a prank, right? Someone messing with LED lights or something?" I thought so at first, but the sequence was too smooth, like programmed but natural at the same time. And there was no sound, no rustling, no voices, nothing that would come from people setting this up. We kept watching for a few minutes. The colors cycled steadily, calm and deliberate, not flashing or blinking randomly. I tried shining my flashlight towards them, but the beam barely reached through the thick trees, and the lights just stayed where they were. I said, maybe it's some kind of wildlife thing, like bioluminescent fungus or bugs. Jesse snorted. There's no fungus that glows in colors like that, man. And bugs wouldn't line up in perfect order like that. We both felt kind of on edge, but also curious. The weird thing was how quiet everything was around those lights. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, wind in the leaves, seemed to stop or get muffled as we stared. Then Ollie barked sharply and took off toward the lights, cutting through some low branches. "Oi, Ollie, come back," Jesse called. But the dog didn't listen. We followed after him, moving cautiously, careful not to break branches or snap twigs. As we got closer, the lights seemed to get brighter but also softer, almost like glowing orbs, but still changing colors in that same slow, perfect pattern. The trees around them were strange. The bark looked almost smooth, not like the rough oak or hickory we were used to. The air felt different too, cooler and heavier, like it was holding its breath. Jesse stopped and shone his flashlight into the cluster of trees with the lights. The beam passed right through one of the lights. It didn't hit anything solid. It was like the light wasn't reflecting off something, but coming from thin air. That freaked me out a bit. We weren't dealing with normal lanterns or glow sticks. Whatever it was weird. We stayed there for maybe 5 minutes before deciding to back off and head back to the trailhead. The sun was fully down by then, and the woods felt denser, shadows curling under every tree. On the way back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The feeling didn't go away, like something was watching us, but from just beyond the tree line. We didn't talk much until we got back to the car. Both of us felt jittery and confused, trying to piece together what we'd seen. I kept thinking about those lights. Not just that they existed, but how they moved through their colors so perfectly, like they were communicating or signaling. But signaling what? We tried to come up with normal explanations. A secret forest research project, some elaborate prank, new type of bioluminescent fungus or insects we didn't know about. None of it fit. I went back to the spot alone a few nights later, but there were no lights. No flickers, no colors, just dark trees and silence. Jesse and I haven't been back since. Ollie seems to avoid the forest now, pulling on the leash to get away from the edge of the trees. I keep looking up at the stars sometimes, wondering if those lights were something natural or not, something that doesn't fit in with what we know. Whatever they weren't in the sky, and they weren't normal. But the weirdest part? That quiet, the feeling like the forest itself held a secret it wasn't ready to share. And us, 2 guys who just happened to see a strange pattern of lights inside the trees and couldn't explain any of it. I was working the overnight shift at WNLR, a small local radio station somewhere on the Oregon coast. The studio was this cramped little room on the second floor of an old building downtown, with peeling paint and a view of the harbor lights flickering through the fog. It was the kind of place where you could almost forget time existed. The clock on the wall ticked loud, and the only other sounds were the static hum of the equipment and the occasional horn from a ship out on the water. My name's Daniel. Everyone just calls me Dan. And I'd been doing these late night shows for a couple years by then. The hours sucked, but the pay was decent, and I liked the quiet. Usually I'd play a mix of classic rock, some blues, and whatever weird local stuff people sent in. I'd talk a little between songs, read some weather updates, and sometimes run requests if anyone called. One night in early November, a thick fog rolled in early. You could almost taste the moisture in the air, and the usual sound of waves crashing against the docks was muffled. I was halfway through a set when the phone rang. It wasn't unusual for people to call in with song requests or shout-outs, so I hit the button to answer without looking at the caller ID. WNLR. You're live with Dan, I said, expecting the usual. Silence. Then this weird clicking sound started. Sharp, repetitive, like Morse code but off rhythm, almost mechanical. It lasted for exactly 7 seconds, then the line went dead. No one spoke, no background noise, just that clicking. I frowned and looked over at the caller ID screen. It showed something strange. An unlisted number, and the location? Pacific Ocean. I blinked and checked it again, thinking it was a glitch or a prank. But the screen didn't change. I tried calling back, but the number was unreachable. At first, I laughed it off, probably some technical hiccup or a prank caller messing with the system. I went back to playing the next song, but that clicking stuck in my head. It felt deliberate, like someone was trying to communicate in a way I wasn't getting. The rest of the shift passed quietly. No other calls, no weird noises on the radio feed. But when I got home, I started digging through old logs and the station's call records from the past few weeks. Nothing else like that showed up. Just a bunch of normal calls from local people. The next night, I was back on air, still thinking about the call. Around 2:30 a.m., the phone rang again. I didn't expect it to be the same number, probably just another late-night caller, but I glanced at the screen. The same unlisted Pacific Ocean number. I hesitated, but answered. Same thing. No voice, just that clicking noise for exactly 7 seconds, then silence. This time, I muted the mic and listened closely. The clicking didn't sound random anymore. It had a pattern, like a code of some kind. But I didn't know Morse code well enough to translate it on the fly, and honestly, it sounded almost wrong. Off-tempo, skipping beats, like a broken signal. I ran a quick search on my phone for the number, thinking maybe it belonged to some research vessel or something, but nothing matched. No boats or ships with that number, no official records, just a blank. By the third night, I started feeling uneasy. The fog outside was thicker than ever, and the studio's old windows rattled with the cold wind. I told my boss about the calls, but he brushed it off as a technical error. I was alone in the building most nights anyway, so there was no one to confirm what I was hearing. On the fourth night, I decided to record the call. When the phone rang, same number, same clicking. I hit record and let it run through. Then I played it back, slowed it down on my computer, trying to catch a pattern. The clicks were the same each time, but every playback sounded a little different, like the sound was warping or glitching. I noticed something else too. Around the time the call ended, my equipment would glitch. Lights on the mixer flickering, static crackling over the speakers, and the clock on the wall would jump ahead by a couple of seconds, like time was skipping. It was subtle, but it happened every time the call came in. Like the call was interfering with the station's electronics. I started to dread the calls, not because they scared me outright, but because they felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Like there was something just beyond reach, something strange sitting out there in the ocean or the airwaves. One night, when I was about to hang up after the call ended, I caught movement outside the window. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from the fog and the streetlights, but it didn't look right. It was too fluid, too slow to be a person or an animal, almost like a ripple in the air. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The movement was gone. After that, I started noticing other weird things. The radio signal would warp at random, cutting out for brief moments before snapping back. Sometimes the whole room would feel cold, like the fog had crept inside. I mentioned it to my friend Leah, who worked nights at a weather station across town. She said she'd been seeing strange blips on their radar over the ocean around the same time every night. Blips that didn't match any known aircraft or ships. We compared notes, and neither of us could explain what was happening. Eventually, the calls stopped. No more clicking, no more glitches, no strange movements outside the window. But the fog stayed. I kept thinking about that number, the calls, the sounds, the glitches, and how something out there might be trying to reach us, or maybe just messing with the signals. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I don't know if I want to. But I still keep a recording of that 7-second click, just in case it ever means something. I was at the kitchen table, folding laundry on a Saturday afternoon, when my 8-year-old daughter Ella suddenly dropped her crayons and pulled out a piece of paper from her backpack. She looked at me with those wide, serious eyes kids get when they're about to tell you something important. "Look what I drew," she said, pushing the paper across the table. I glanced down and saw a simple shape, a perfect circle, smooth edges, no wings, no windows, no lights. Just a plain circle, about the size of a small plate on the paper. It looked odd. Not like anything I'd expect a kid to draw as a spaceship or anything from TV. "What's that?" I asked. "It's the thing I saw," she said. "It floated above the playground." I paused, folding a shirt slowly. "The playground?" "Yeah, at recess yesterday." Ella's school is just a few blocks from our house on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. The playground is pretty normal. Swings, slides, that kind of stuff. Nothing special. I tried to hide the way my stomach twisted. I've read enough weird stories online to know this kind of thing doesn't usually turn out well, but Ella has always had a vivid imagination, so I didn't want to freak out. "Tell me more about it," I said. She pushed the paper closer and pointed at the circle. It was just there, floating. Like it wasn't moving, but it wasn't sitting on anything either. Just hovering right above the monkey bars. I blinked. "Did anyone else see it?" She shrugged. "I don't think so. No one was looking. But I did. It was really big, like bigger than the slide." I nodded, trying to keep it casual. "What did it look like? Did it make any noise?" "No noise," she frowned, remembering. "And it didn't have lights or windows or anything. Just the circle. It didn't spin or blink. It just floated." I asked her a few more questions, trying to figure out what kind of story she was making up. She insisted it wasn't pretend. When she spoke about it, she wasn't excited or scared, just calm, like she was telling me about a weird cloud or a funny shape she saw. Later, when Ella was playing in her room, I pulled up the local school's website to check the playground security cameras. There weren't any outdoor cams I could find, just the usual indoor ones. I called the school office to ask if any teachers saw anything strange the day before, but got no real answers, just vague, nothing unusual remarks. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the circle. The way Ella described it wasn't like a balloon or a drone. It didn't make sense. And she was never one for flights of fancy like this. The next morning, I asked if I could walk her to school. She was reluctant, but agreed. At the playground, she pointed up to where the monkey bars stood, and I stared at the empty blue sky, the usual morning sun filtering through some thin clouds. Nothing out of the ordinary. On the way home, I asked if she noticed anything else weird that day. She hesitated, then said, "There was a humming sound, but only when the circle was there." "Humming?" I said. "Like a low, buzzing noise. But it wasn't loud, more like inside your head." That made me shiver, and I tried to act casual. "Did it last long?" "Just a minute or two, then it stopped, and the circle went away." The days that followed felt off. Ella didn't mention the circle again, but sometimes she'd stare at the sky, her face blank like she was trying to see something no one else could. One evening, as I was making dinner, I heard her calling me from the living room. She was holding the drawing again, pointing at the circle. "Look, it's different." I squinted, confused. The circle was the same shape, but this time there was a faint shadow inside it. A darker smudge, barely noticeable, like a blur. I asked her what changed. I added the shadow. It was there when I looked again today. It kind of moved around inside the circle, but still no wings or lights. I didn't say much, but inside I was unsettled. I checked the sky at night through the window, but it was just the usual stars, no shapes or strange lights. One night, I woke up because Lila, our dog, a goofy mix with a patch over one eye, was barking like crazy at the window. I got up and looked out, but the street was empty, quiet except for the rustling leaves. Then I caught a glimpse of something pale and round, moving slowly above the tree line across the street. It hovered there for a second, just like Ella said, then disappeared. No sound, no lights, just a perfect pale circle against the dark sky. I didn't want to wake Ella, but I felt frozen in place. When Lila finally settled down, I closed the curtains and sat on the couch for a long time, staring into the darkness. After that, Ella kept drawing the circle every day. She never added details beyond the shadow, but sometimes she'd trace the edges, making it bigger or smaller, like she was trying to figure out how it worked. I tried to tell myself it was just a kid's imagination, or maybe some kind of optical illusion. But I've looked for explanations everywhere, and none fit. The thing is, I don't think it's something dangerous or scary in the way people expect. It's just there, watching maybe, or waiting. I don't know if I ever will understand what it is or why Ella saw it. All I have is that drawing and the memory of that silent, perfect circle floating above the playground, with no wings, no lights, no windows, just a shape that didn't belong anywhere. I worked the night shift at a small printing plant on the outskirts of Erie, Pennsylvania. The kind of place where the machines hum constantly, and the only other people around are the occasional forklift driver or the maintenance guy checking on the presses. My name's Jess. I started a few months ago, mostly because I needed something steady, and honestly, nights made sense. Less noise outside, easier to focus. Or so I thought. It started a couple weeks in, maybe the third or fourth night. I was on a break, sitting in the break room, which is basically a room with a window that looks out onto the loading dock and a stretch of trees beyond that. The clock on the wall showed 2:33 a.m., and that's when I first noticed it. There was this bright white light hovering just above the tree line, not blinking or moving like a plane or helicopter, just sitting there. I blinked, I'm trying to figure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. The light didn't flicker or change. It was steady, like a perfect orb, maybe the size of a basketball, but glowing way too bright to be anything normal. The trees beneath it looked darker than usual, like the light was soaking up the surroundings. I grabbed my phone to get a closer look through the window, but by the time I lifted it up, the light was gone, just vanished. No flash, no trail, nothing. I shrugged it off at first, probably some kind of reflection from a passing car or a street lamp down the road, but every night after that at exactly 2:33 a.m., it showed up again. Same spot, same brightness. I started timing my breaks just to see it. The first few nights, I'd get distracted and miss it, but then I made it a point. Every single night, like clockwork, that light would be there. And every single time I tried to get a better look, stand closer to the window, open the door, or grab my phone, the light disappeared instantly. No noise, no movement, just a bright, solid light that never moved but was clearly there. One night, I told my coworker, Tom. He's been working there for years, mostly days, so I wasn't sure if he'd believe me. He just laughed and said maybe I was losing it from the night shift. I didn't press it. I'm not the type to hallucinate. But that didn't explain why the light kept showing up every night, exactly at the same time. Curious, I started watching the loading dock too. Sometimes I'd see the usual trucks come and go, the security lights flickering on and off, but that light never seemed affected by any of that. It just hung there, silent and bright. One night, a week after I first noticed it, the weather was heavy with fog, the kind that muffles everything and turns streetlights into glowing halos. I thought maybe the fog would hide the light, but at 2:33 a.m. sharp, it appeared again, though the edges were blurred, like it was struggling to shine through the thick mist. That night, I left the break room and went outside. I was wearing my work jacket, and Pippa, my dog, was waiting at home, curled up by the heater. I didn't want to worry her, so I left her inside. I walked toward the tree line, following the faint glow. The yard beyond the dock is fenced, but there's a gate I can open. As I got closer, the air felt different, thicker, cooler, almost electric. My skin prickled. I stopped a few feet from the trees, staring up into the fog. The light was right there, just beyond the branches. I held my breath and took a step forward. The light blinked out instantly. No sound, no warning, just gone. I stood there for a minute, trying to hear anything, but the fog swallowed all noise. My heart was racing, and I felt stupid for chasing a light like a kid. When I turned back toward the plant, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shape, maybe a person, standing just inside the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. No leaves rustling, no footsteps. I called out, but only silence answered. That same week, the security cameras on the loading dock started glitching at exactly 2:33 a.m. The feeds would pixelate and cut out for a few seconds, then come back. Maintenance swore it was just interference or a faulty cable, but the timing seemed too precise. At home, I kept replaying the footage from my phone and the security cams. Nothing showed the light directly, but every time it flickered out, the static seemed to form a faint outline, like a tall, thin figure standing near the tree line. Nothing clear, just a shadowy shape. One night, I had a weird dream. I was back at the plant, but everything was dark except for that light, shining brighter than ever. I was walking toward it, and the shape was there again, just standing still. I tried to call out, but no sound came. Then I woke up sweating. The night after the dream, I was on my break again. The clock hit 2:33 a.m., and the light appeared like usual. This time, I didn't move right away. I watched it longer than usual, trying to catch any hint of movement. Then I noticed the tree line behind the light was wrong. Some trees seemed distorted, like they were bending the wrong way or stretched out. The shadows between them didn't match the shape of branches. It felt unnatural, like something was warping the space. I tried to get my phone up, but the light blinked out again. I heard a faint noise then, a low hum, almost like a distant engine or a machine running far away. It lasted a second, then silence. I told myself it was probably the factory or a plane overhead, but the timing was too exact. The days that followed were tense. I started feeling watched, like someone or something was out there, just beyond sight. At work, I caught coworkers glancing toward the windows late at night, but when I asked, no one else mentioned the light. One night on my way home, the highway was foggy, and the headlights of cars looked like blurry ghosts. I felt uneasy, glancing in my rearview mirror too often. I thought I saw the light again, but when I looked back, there was nothing. When I pulled into my driveway, Pippa was waiting on the porch, tail wagging but alert. I swear she looked toward the trees behind the house like she sensed something. That night, I didn't sleep well. The clock on my bedside table read 2:33 a.m. when I woke up suddenly. I thought I heard the faint hum again, coming from outside. I peeked through the window and saw nothing but the dark yard. No light, no shape. I haven't seen it since. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in my head, but the glitches on the security cams and the feeling of being watched don't add up. Maybe it was some kind of drone or a test. Maybe it was something else. I'm just glad the light disappeared before things got worse. And I'm even more glad Pippa was there. She's been staring out the window ever since, like she's waiting for it to come back. The power went out just after dinner, right as I was washing the last of the dishes. It was one of those sudden outages you get in the country. No warning, just everything going black. I live out in the sticks of northeastern Wyoming, about a mile off the main road. The house is old, wood siding, a rickety porch, surrounded mostly by fields and patches of scrub forest. My wife, Jenna, was upstairs putting our son Caleb to bed, and I was downstairs with our dog, Birch, a lanky black lab mix who's generally too chill but suddenly got restless when the lights flickered out. We use a well pump for water, so no power means no running water either. Jenna and I had already been talking about getting a generator, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and started down the hall toward the front door to check the fuse box. Outside, the night was quiet, colder than usual for mid-September, dry air, clear skies. Stars were sharp overhead, but the moon was a thin crescent barely lighting the yard. Birch followed me out onto the porch, his nails clicking on the wood. The silence felt too complete. No crickets, no distant cars, no wind. just quiet like the whole world was holding its breath. I shone the flashlight around. Everything looked normal at first, the fence posts, the garden beds, the gravel driveway stretching away from the house. Then, something caught my eye near the edge of the lawn. There were patches on the ground, 3 of them, maybe 4, scorched circles of dirt, perfectly round, about the size of a dinner plate. They looked like little burn marks, but without any ashes or signs of fire nearby. The grass around them was brown and dead in neat, clean rings. I crouched down and ran my fingers through the dirt. It was dry, but felt like it'd been scorched hot enough to kill anything living in it. The odd thing was, these patches didn't look like they'd been there long. The grass nearby was still green and healthy. I called Jenna outside. She came down the stairs, rubbing her eyes, and when she saw the circles, her face went pale. "Did you make these?" she asked, half joking, but with this edge of worry. "No," I said. "I didn't even notice them until now." We started walking around the yard, and more patches appeared. 4 in front, 2 on the side near the woods, and 1 right near the old swing set, where Caleb plays. All perfect circles, evenly spaced in a pattern I couldn't quite make sense of. Birch growled low in his throat, staring toward the dark tree line like he sensed something I didn't. We went back inside to grab jackets and flashlights to check the rest of the property. As we stepped off the porch, the power kicked back on, lights flickering in the house, the fridge humming again. It was almost like the outage hadn't lasted more than a few minutes, but Jenna and I both knew it had been longer. Caleb was awake now, rubbing his eyes in the living room. We told him about the patches, and he looked at us like we were joking. But then he asked quietly if the circle people were back. I blinked. "Circle people?" He nodded, pointing toward the window. "They come at night, Mama says. They make the circles." Jenna and I exchanged a glance, but said nothing more. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Birch pacing downstairs, scratching at the back door. When I finally got up and opened it, the yard looked normal in the porch light, no signs of more scorch marks. The next day, I went out with a small shovel and a camera. I wanted to document the patches before they faded or got covered up. While taking pictures, I noticed something else odd. The edges of the patches weren't just burnt dirt. The soil in the center of each circle was compacted, as if something heavy had pressed down evenly across the whole spot. I even found small indentations around some of the circles. Tiny holes in the dirt, no bigger than a pencil tip, arranged in symmetrical patterns. I showed the photos to my brother Pete, who's a mechanic and a no-nonsense guy. He said it looked like someone had been poking around with a tool or maybe some kind of industrial equipment. But the patterns were too perfect, too precise for any normal farm machinery. Besides, no one had been near our property, and the nearest neighbor is over 2 miles away. That afternoon, I decided to walk the perimeter fence line. I brought Birch, who was still uneasy. As we walked, I kept seeing small patches of scorched earth just beyond the fence, always the same perfect circles, spaced evenly apart like some kind of marker. I thought maybe the fire department or a utility crew had been out here, but when I called them, they said no one had been scheduled. That night, the power went out again around 10 p.m. The house plunged into darkness just as a soft wind picked up. I went to check the yard with my flashlight, and Birch was barking toward the woods, low and sharp. I shone the light in that direction, but didn't see anything at first. Then the beam caught something strange, a pale glow hovering just over the treetops, about 200 yards from the house. It wasn't a fire or a lantern, more like a diffuse light, soft and steady, but definitely unnatural. It didn't move or flicker, just hung there silently. I kept watching for a few minutes, and then the glow pulsed once, brighter and then dimmer. Birch whined low and tugged at his leash. Suddenly, the lights in the house flickered back on, lighters, and the glow vanished instantly. I told Jenna, but she was tired and didn't want to believe me. The following days were restless. More patches showed up in the yard, each one seeming to grow closer to the house. I started keeping a notebook, tracking when and where they appeared. One morning, I woke up to find a circle on the porch, right where I'd been sitting the night before. It was strange how the dirt looked different under the porch light, almost like the circle was absorbing it, or maybe repelling it. The grass around it was curling away as if burned by some invisible heat. That day, I noticed Birch was more jumpy. He wouldn't go near the woods, and sometimes he'd freeze, staring at the sky like he could see something I couldn't. I tried to shrug it off as stress, but I wasn't so sure. A week in, the patches were nearly surrounding the house. Jenna was getting worried, but I couldn't figure out what it meant or who, if anyone, was responsible. Then one night, I woke up to a soft humming noise. It was faint but steady, like electricity or the sound of a distant engine idling. I got up and looked out the window toward the woods. The humming grew louder, and the porch light flickered. Outside, the fog was thick and rolling in fast. Through the mist, I thought I saw shapes moving near the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, almost shadowy. They didn't step on the ground, but seemed to float just above it. I blinked, and they were gone. The humming stopped, and the porch light steadied. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the yard and the patches. In the morning, there was a new circle near the back door, smaller than the others, but still perfect, still scorched. I haven't touched it. The patches keep appearing, never in the same place twice, always perfectly round, always scorched. Birch won't sleep in the house anymore and waits at the back door until I let him out. Jenna says it's just stress or animals digging holes, but I know what I've seen. Whatever it is, it's here. And it's watching. And those circles, I don't think they're just burnt patches of dirt. I think there's something else entirely. I don't know how to explain this right, but I'm going to tell it like it happened because I'm still not sure what to make of it. It started one morning last October when I was out fishing on Clearview Lake. That's a small, quiet spot in northern Minnesota. Not much around it except woods and a few cabins scattered here and there. I've been fishing there since I was a kid, and I know that lake pretty well. I was out early, just before dawn, rowing my old aluminum boat. The water was glassy calm, and there was this thick fog rolling in, kind of sticking close to the surface. The kind of morning where everything feels muted, like you're in a dream. I had my fishing gear and my GPS mounted near the bow, a little handheld Garmin I use to mark good spots and make sure I don't get turned around in the fog. I'd been out maybe an hour, drifting toward my favorite spot near the northwest shore, when my GPS started acting weird. The screen flickered and then zoomed in on a little island that I'd never heard of. It showed up as a perfect circle, maybe 200 feet across, right in the middle of the lake. I thought it was a glitch at first. Clearview doesn't have any islands that I know of. I checked the map on the GPS, and this island wasn't there at all. I even pulled out my phone and looked it up on Google Maps once I had service later, but no island anywhere near that spot. Curious, I rowed toward the spot. The fog was thick, making it hard to see more than a few dozen feet ahead. The GPS kept the island marked as I moved closer, but the lake looked just like always. Flat water, no sign of land or any shape breaking the surface. I circled the area for a while, watching the GPS. The island was exactly where the device said it was, perfectly round and still on the screen. I kept expecting to see something, rocks, logs, debris, but there was nothing. At one point, I swear I thought I saw a dark shape just beneath the surface, but every time I looked closer, it vanished. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks with the fog. The strangest part was the GPS itself. As I got closer to the spot, the device started glitching more. The screen froze a couple of times, and then when it caught up, the island was gone. Just gone. The map was back to normal, showing open water. I sat back in the boat, rubbing my eyes, feeling dumb. I was about to call it a weird glitch and head home when my radio crackled with static. I carry a small marine VHF radio for emergencies, but no one usually uses channel 16 on Clearview. The static wasn't loud or continuous, more like a quiet hiss with faint, almost rhythmic pulses underneath. I fiddled with the knobs, trying to clear it, but it didn't go away. It was nothing like normal interference. It almost felt like the radio was picking up something deliberate, but I had no idea what. I didn't say anything over the radio. There was no voice or anything, just that weird static with a pattern I couldn't figure out. It went on for about 5 minutes, then suddenly stopped. That's when I noticed the fog had gotten even thicker. The air was cold and still, and the lake felt heavier somehow. Like it wasn't just water anymore. I checked the GPS again. It was acting normally, no sign of the island or any glitches. I started rowing back to the dock, but the fog was so dense I could barely see the shoreline I knew was right there. I kept my eyes on the GPS to make sure I wasn't drifting, but it suddenly flashed again. This time, the island reappeared. Same perfect circle, same exact spot. But something was different. There was a faint outline inside the island, like a shadow. I blinked and it disappeared. I told myself to calm down, that I was tired and seeing things. When I finally made it back to shore, I hooked my boat up and packed my gear in silence. The fog was still thick over the lake, but the island on the GPS was gone again. At home, I tried to look into it more. I checked every map I could find online. No island, no mention of anything unusual in that part of Clearview Lake. I called the local ranger station just to see if they'd heard of any new formations or changes. They sounded confused and said the lake hadn't changed in decades. The next morning, I went back to the lake, hoping to catch the island on the GPS again, but it didn't show up at all, no matter where I went. That afternoon, I pulled up the GPS data from the previous day. The track logs were mostly normal, except for the spots where the island appeared. The coordinates matched the exact same place in the lake every time, but the weirdest thing was the GPS timestamps around those spots. They were off by a few minutes, like the device had jumped forward and then back, almost like a hiccup in time. I'm not someone who believes in crazy stuff, but the whole thing was unsettling. I kept telling myself it was some sort of software glitch, or maybe an error with the satellite signal, but the radio fog, the time glitches, it didn't add up. A couple days later, I was talking to an old friend, Marv. He's lived near the lake for years and fishes there too. I told him about the island on the GPS and the weird radio noises. He paused, then something that stuck with me. "There's a spot out there," he said, "where compasses spin funny and electronics just act up. Some people call it the Stillwater Circle. Nobody can explain it, but it's been on the lake for a long time. Boats avoid it." I asked why. He just shrugged and said, "Old stories, strange happenings. Folks say it's like something doesn't want you to see it." I went back out the next night, this time with Marv's old compass and a backup GPS. The fog was rolling in again, thick and cold. We cruised slowly toward where the island had shown up before. The compass needle started to twitch as we approached, swinging wildly, refusing to settle. My GPS froze up again. The backup device did the same. The radio crackled softly, and I could swear I heard the faint rhythm again under the static. We slowed the boat and just waited. The lake was completely still except for the sound of our motors idling. After a while, the fog thinned a little and the compass stopped spinning. I looked down and the water around the boat was darker, like the lake floor was dipping deeper right there. We didn't see any island. Marv told me quietly, "Sometimes you gotta know when to leave the water alone." We headed back, and the devices returned to normal. Since then, I've stayed away from that exact spot. I still fish the lake, but never near the Stillwater Circle, if that's what it's called. I'm not sure what I saw or didn't see. Maybe it was a glitch, a trick of the fog, or something deeper. The radio static, the compass, the time skips, they're real enough to me. I just know there's something in that part of Clearview Lake that doesn't want to be found. The whole thing started on a Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Harlan Ridge, this tiny town in northern Vermont where everybody knows everybody, and my wall clock just stopped. No ticking, no hands moving, just dead. It was 3:17 p.m., and it froze there like someone hit pause on it. That might not sound like much, but it wasn't the first one to go out that day. By dinner, my neighbor, Susan, told me her microwave had stopped working halfway through cooking dinner. Then her phone's screen started flickering weirdly, and the digital clock on her stove jumped back and forth between numbers like it was glitching out. Across the street, old Mr. Ledbetter said his grandfather clock stopped chiming right on the hour. He's usually full of stories, but this time, he looked confused and a little worried. I figured it was some kind of power surge or transformer issue. Maybe a storm was rolling in. But the sky was clear, cool for late summer, but no clouds, no wind, nothing that looked like trouble. That night, the power flickered a few times, but it never went out fully. The clocks in town that I checked were all messed up. Some stopped, some jumped forward or backward by random amounts. What creeped me out most was how the town's streetlights seemed to buzz softly, like they were straining against something invisible. I asked around, but most people just shrugged it off or said their gadgets were acting up. I kept a journal after that. If I'm honest, I wanted to convince myself it was just electrical weirdness. But then, the strange things started happening to me. About 3 days in, I was walking home late after my shift at the hardware store. The street was quiet, a little fog rolling in from the hills. My wristwatch showed 11:42 p.m. when I glanced at it. A minute later, I realized I had no idea how I got from the corner to my porch. Like I'd blinked, and suddenly I was standing there with the door key in my hand. The whole walk was missing. I checked my watch, still 11:42. No seconds had passed. My heart started racing, but I shook it off, telling myself maybe I just got distracted or lost track of time. A couple nights later, I was sitting on the porch with Luna, my dog, a little mutt with bright eyes and a stubborn streak. We'd been hearing this low static hum around the neighborhood, almost like a distant radio, but no station or voice ever came through. I looked up at the streetlights. They were flickering again. Then Luna froze, ears up, staring down the road like she saw something I didn't. The static hummed louder in my ears. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I checked my phone for the time, 10:03 p.m. The streetlights buzzed with electricity, but as I watched, they suddenly blinked out one by one. The whole block went dark except for the faint glow from a few porch lights. I swear I heard something move in the shadows beyond the trees, a soft rustling. Luna growled low and pulled at her leash. I told her it was nothing, but when I looked up again, the streetlights flickered back on as if nothing had happened. The static hum was gone too. That's when I realized other people were experiencing weird things too. At the hardware store, one guy told me he'd lost 20 minutes while working on his car. He looked at the clock in his garage, then suddenly it was almost lunch, and he had no memory of what happened between. Another friend said her digital alarm clock rang in the middle of the night, but when she checked, the time was frozen at 3:33 a.m., and the clock never moved again. The whole town felt off. People talked about missing time episodes, but were reluctant to bring it up openly. It was like we all suspected something strange was happening, but didn't want to say it out loud. One night, I set up a small voice recorder by my bedside to catch anything unusual. At about 2 a.m., it picked up a low-frequency buzzing mixed with a faint clicking sound. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then stopped. When I woke up, my bedside clock was frozen at 2:02 a.m. A few nights later, Luna woke me up barking. I got up and went to the window. Outside, the sky was darker than usual. No stars, no moon, just a dull, heavy blackness hanging over the town. The streetlights buzzed again, this time with a strange blue flicker. I thought I saw a shape moving between the trees on the hill behind my house, tall, thin, and standing perfectly still. I grabbed my jacket and went outside, Luna pulling hard on the leash. I called out, but there was no reply. The air was thick and cold, though the thermometer said it was almost 70 degrees. The streetlights blinked off again, plunging me into darkness for a few seconds before flickering back on. I looked toward the hill, but the shape was gone. After that, the clock and electrical problems got worse. My neighbor's router stopped working, then her television died. Her digital photo frame showed static instead of pictures. Other neighbors reported their car radios acting strange, turning on by themselves or changing stations rapidly. I started noticing odd things about my own electronics. My phone battery drained in hours, even though I barely used it. The flashlight app flickered on and off. My laptop keyboard sometimes typed random letters when I wasn't touching it. The missing time episodes got longer too. One afternoon, I was fixing a shelf in the garage when I realized it was suddenly dark outside. My watch said it had jumped forward 3 hours, but I had no memory of what happened in between. Luna was asleep by the door, unfazed. I started keeping my door locked even during the day. The whole town seemed to hold its breath like something was about to happen. People's eyes looked tired, anxious. One evening, I was sitting on the porch after dinner watching the sunset bleed orange into the sky. The humming returned, soft, mechanical, but not quite. I glanced down the street. The streetlights buzzed, their glow uneven. The shadows between houses looked too long, like they stretched toward me. Luna was restless, pacing near the door. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a message. But when I unlocked it, there was nothing there, just a blank screen. I looked up. The streetlights all blinked out at once, plunging the neighborhood into darkness. A moment later, they returned, but the glow was colder, harsher, almost sterile. Then, a flash of white light from the hill behind the houses. It was brief, like a camera flash, but enough to blind me for a second. Luna growled sharply and pulled me back inside. I closed the door behind me and checked the clocks around the house. All of them were stopped, some at strange times, others with hands spinning slowly backward. I sat down, heart pounding, staring at the black screens and frozen dials. The next morning, the power was back to normal, the clocks all ticking again, appliances working as usual. People acted like nothing had happened, but I know it did. And sometimes when the night is still and the lights buzz low, I swear I can feel time bending just out of reach, like the world skips a beat and forgets me for a little while. I don't know what it means, I just know it's real. It happened back in late April. Thursday night going into Friday, I remember because I'd worked late, second shift at the plant, done by 12:30, home a little after 1. I live in a cul-de-sac just outside of Newton, Iowa. Quiet neighborhood. Old ranch-style houses, modest yards, nothing fancy. Everybody knows each other well enough to wave, but no one's real nosy. It's the kind of place where people still leave their porch lights on all night without thinking about it. That night was calm. Clear skies, no wind, maybe mid-40s. I came in, dropped my boots by the door, poured a glass of tea, and sat on the couch to unwind a bit before bed. My dog, Finley, she's a blue heeler mix, was already zonked out on the rug near the sliding door. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every electronic thing in the house shut off at once. Lights, TV, router, even my watch backlight. The fridge made a weird chuffing sound and went quiet. Then, maybe 2 seconds later, everything blinked back on, like a power flicker, but there wasn't even a hum. No surge, no flicker from the bulbs, just off, then on. And at the exact same time, Finley leapt to her feet and bolted down the hall. Not barking, just gone. She wedged herself under the bed in the guest room, which she never does. She's not a nervous dog. Doesn't care about fireworks or thunderstorms. This was different. A low rumble started maybe 5 seconds after that, not thunder. It was deeper, steadier. You didn't hear it as much as feel it, like standing near a big truck engine, but there were no engines around. I opened the sliding door to see if it was something outside. It was quiet. Too quiet. Not just no traffic or wind, no bugs, no night birds, no distant train whistle. Just that low hum coming from everywhere and nowhere. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I stepped out onto the patio in socks. It was cold against the concrete. Nothing was moving. The neighbor's porch light across the street was still on, but I noticed something weird. The light wasn't reaching the ground right, like it was shining through fog, except there was no fog. Just this vague blur in the air around the beam, like watching a heat mirage at night. The hum lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped all at once. No fading out, just gone. The second it cut off, Finley started whining from the guest room. I went to check on her, and she was shaking. Wouldn't come out. I had to slide the bed to get to her. She stayed pressed up against me like glue the rest of the night. Next morning, I figured I'd dreamed half of it, or maybe it was just a weird power thing. But when I took Finley out for a walk around the block, something felt off. Mrs. Cordell, the widow a few doors down, was out front in her robe, looking up at the trees like she was trying to see something that wasn't there. I said good morning. She looked at me for a second, then said, "Did your lights go out too?" I asked her what time, and she said, 17 after 2. I was watching an old murder show, and the screen went black. Then my record player turned on by itself. I asked if she meant the radio, but she shook her head. She has one of those vintage players that only works when you crank it on manually. It had started playing a classical record she hadn't touched in weeks. Down the street, Mr. Alvarez was sitting on his porch with his hands wrapped around a mug. He's always up early, but he looked wired. I asked if his power went out, and he just said, "Everything went weird." His weather station reset itself and beeped like he'd unplugged it. Microwave clock was flashing. He said he thought he was having a stroke at first. I didn't mention the humming, but he did. Said it felt like a low plane was passing overhead, except nothing passed. Just the pressure of it. His cat, Mango, was hiding behind the dryer and wouldn't come out until noon. By the time I made it to the end of the cul-de-sac, I'd talked to 4 neighbors, and every single one mentioned the exact same time, 2:17. Most of them had animals that freaked out. Mrs. Cordell's usually mouthy parrot didn't make a sound until dinner. The McKay's retriever chewed through the baseboard in the laundry room. I decided to check my router logs when I got back inside. I'm not super tech savvy, but it's an old habit from troubleshooting streaming issues. The log showed a gap, completely blank, from 2:17.3 sent to 2:7:44. Then everything resumes like nothing happened. That night, just out of curiosity, I set up a trail cam in my backyard. Nothing fancy, just an old bushnell that straps to a tree. I pointed it toward the back fence, figuring maybe a coyote or raccoon had wandered through and spooked Finley. I also left my phone on the windowsill recording audio from 2 to 3 a.m., just for the hell of it. The next day, I checked both. The trail cam had 3 videos from that hour, but one stood out. Time-stamped 2:17:18, 30 seconds long. It showed the yard, still and empty, then suddenly lit up by 3 distinct pulses of light. Not lightning, there was no flash and fade, just quick, cold pulses. Each lasted maybe half a second. The shadows from the trees jumped like something overhead passed by, but there was no object in frame. Just the shadows shifting wrong, like they were responding to something invisible. The audio from my phone was worse. At exactly 2:17:12, there's a sharp crackle, like microphone feedback, followed by a very low vibrating tone. It continues for about 30 seconds. No voices, no machines. Just that sound, and at one point the faintest thump, like something touched the glass of the window. I didn't sleep well for a while after that. Neither did Finley. She started avoiding the back door completely. I had to move her food bowl to the kitchen. Even during the day, she'd look up at nothing, ears pinned, like she was tracking something I couldn't see. About a week later, I printed a flyer and stuck it in the mailboxes of everyone in our little loop. Just said, "Did something strange happen around 2:17 a.m. last Thursday night?" and included my phone number. 8 people texted. 2 called. Every single one had something go weird with electronics or their pets. One guy's security camera had corrupted footage. It froze at 2:17 and skipped to 2:18 with static in between. The Kleins, who live at the end of the street, said their whole fish tank lit up like a strobe for no reason. The power strip wasn't even on. Nobody saw anything in the sky. Nobody remembers a flash or a crash, but every clock was the same. Every pet acted like the world was ending, and no one can explain the sound. It never happened again. Not like that. But every now and then, once every couple months, Finley still wakes up at 2:17 on the dot and stares at the ceiling like she's waiting for something. The humming started about a week ago. I first noticed it late at night, just as I was getting ready to go to bed. It was this low, almost imperceptible sound, like a distant engine running somewhere far off, but steady, constant. I figured maybe it was some kind of transformer hum, or maybe a neighbor's generator. But what threw me off was how it seemed to be right outside my house, almost in the backyard. My name's Jared. I live in this quiet suburban neighborhood in Cedar Grove. Typical 2-story houses with small yards, streetlights that cast more shadow than light, and people who mostly keep to themselves. I'm not super social with the neighbors, but I've never heard or seen anything unusual around here, so this humming stuck out. The first night I heard it, I paused while brushing my teeth and just listened. It was soft, almost too faint to tell what it was exactly. I walked over to the back window and looked outside, but there was nothing. No cars, no flashing lights, no movement in the yard or the trees, just silence, apart from that humming. I opened the window a crack to listen better, but the moment I opened it, the sound stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I thought maybe I imagined it or it was some weird trick of the house settling. But then the next night, the same thing happened. The humming started around the same time, a little after 11 p.m. I listened from my bed for a while, then finally got up to check. I went outside into the backyard, stepping off the porch and into the grass. I stopped, and the humming was gone. Nothing. I waited for a few minutes, hoping it would come back, but no luck. Frustrated, I went back inside and closed the door behind me. Almost immediately, the humming started again, quiet but definitely there. I opened the back door just a crack to see if it was coming from outside, and again, the moment the door opened, the humming cut out. That's when it started to freak me out a little. I checked with a couple neighbors the next day, just casual chat when I saw them outside during the afternoon. I asked if they ever heard any strange humming noises around here late at night. They looked at me like I was nuts. None of them had noticed anything. One guy said the neighborhood was too quiet at night for any strange sounds, just crickets and the occasional car. I didn't mention the humming again. I kept checking at night, always alone. Luna, my dog, a scruffy terrier mix with this habit of barking at nothing, didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary either. She stayed curled up on the couch while I kept hearing that sound. The nights after that were the same. The humming would start somewhere after 11, steady and low. It didn't sound mechanical or electrical exactly, more like a faint vibration you could feel through the floorboards if you paid attention. It wasn't loud enough to be a nuisance, just this constant undercurrent that made me uneasy. But every time I tried to go outside or even open a window, the sound vanished, like it knew I was paying attention. One night, I decided to test it. I left the back door open just a crack and stood on the porch, listening carefully. The humming was there, faint but steady. I slowly moved off the porch and into the yard, stepping onto the grass. Instantly, it stopped. I froze and waited, and after about 10 seconds, the humming started again, but only when I was back on the porch, within reach of the house. As soon as I took a step forward, it cut out. I didn't hear any other noises. No footsteps, no engine revving up or down, no voices. The neighborhood was still and quiet as usual. It was like the sound existed in some kind of bubble around the house, but only when I wasn't fully outside of it. That made no sense. The next few days, I tried sitting outside in the backyard with headphones on to drown out the humming. Sometimes Luna would come with me, but she got restless and would paw at the door to go back inside. She never barked or growled, just acted a little uneasy. It felt like the sound was irritating her somehow, or maybe she could hear it more clearly than I could. A couple nights in, I tried recording the sound on my phone. I used the voice memo app and stood near the back door, waiting for the humming to start. It was there, just like always. But when I played the recording back, I could barely hear anything. Just a faint buzz that might have been interference or some background noise. Nothing clear or distinct. I showed the recordings to my brother, Tim, who's a bit of a tech guy. He said it could be radio frequency interference or some kind of electronic noise, but there was nothing obvious in the files. He recommended a sound meter app to measure decibels and frequency bands. So I downloaded one and started testing at night. The humming measured around 20 to 25 decibels. Really quiet, like a whisper or distant fridge hum. The frequency was low and steady, nothing that jumped out as unnatural. But again, every time I moved outside, the sound disappeared. I started losing sleep over it. I'd lie awake listening for the humming, trying to figure out if it was coming from a specific spot in the yard or maybe from the trees beyond the fence. I even considered the possibility that the sound was coming from inside the house itself, some appliance or wiring problem. But I couldn't locate a source. One particularly foggy night, I was sitting on the porch with Luna, wrapped in a blanket. The streetlights cast weird shadows in the mist, and the world felt muffled and distant. The humming was there, low and constant. Suddenly, Luna stood up, ears perked, staring toward the edge of the yard where the woods started. I followed her gaze, but saw nothing. The fog blurred everything beyond the fence. I felt this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. Luna let out a soft growl and slowly backed inside without me needing to tell her. I sat alone on the porch for another half hour, the humming pulsing in time with my heartbeat. At one point, I swear I saw a faint flicker of light in the trees, a pale glow, like a flashlight beam moving slowly, but when I looked directly, it was gone. The next morning, I asked the neighbors if they'd seen any strange lights or noticed anything unusual the night before. Again, blank stares. No one had seen or heard a thing. Over the week, the humming kept coming and going with no pattern. Sometimes it would start earlier, sometimes later. Sometimes I could almost swear I felt it vibrating through the walls inside the house. Other times, it was barely there. I tried to distract myself with work and friends, but the sound stuck in my mind. It was like this quiet, persistent itch I couldn't scratch. It wasn't frightening in the way something loud or violent would be, but it made me nervous all the same. Last night, it happened again. I was sitting in the living room with the windows closed, the humming faint but unmistakable. I got up and opened the back door, stepping outside into the cool night air. The sound cut out immediately, leaving the night dead silent except for the rustling of leaves. I stayed out there for a few minutes, looking around. Nothing moved. No lights, no sounds, no signs that anyone else was around. Luna was asleep on the porch step. After a while, I went back inside and closed the door. The humming started back up, low and steady. I'm not sure what it is or why it's here. No one else in the neighborhood hears it, and it disappears whenever I get close or step outside. I haven't told anyone else because I don't want to sound crazy. Maybe it's some weird electrical interference, or maybe I'm just losing my mind. But some nights, when the air is thick and the world outside feels too quiet, that humming is there. Waiting. I didn't really believe in anything strange before all this happened. I mean, I've always liked looking up at the night sky, stars, planets, satellites, but I never thought I'd end up with footage that I couldn't explain. It started a couple months ago during one of those clear, cold October nights here in northern Maine. I'm a photographer, mostly landscape and nature stuff, and I got into night sky time-lapse photography last year, and I'd set up my camera in the backyard of my place in Eastport, a small town right on the coast. The air was crisp, a little damp from the ocean fog that had rolled out earlier, and I was hoping to catch some good shots of the Milky Way, or maybe the Northern Lights if I was lucky. That night, I set the camera on the tripod in the side yard, pointed it up at the sky just past the tree line, and programmed it to take a photo every 10 seconds for about 4 hours. I figured I'd check the footage the next morning. The next day, I downloaded the images and started stitching them into a time-lapse video. I was scrolling through, watching the stars slowly move across the sky, the clouds drifting by now and then, when I noticed something odd. There was this shape, sort of oval, kind of like a balloon or a blimp, right in the middle of the frame. It was dark at first, almost blending into the sky, but then it slowly started rotating. Not the stars or the planets, just this shape. It moved too, but very subtly, almost like it was hovering. At first I thought it was a drone, or maybe some kind of weather balloon caught in the frame. But then the colors started to change. The shape shifted from a deep blue to an eerie green, then a dull orange, cycling slowly. None of the stars did anything like that. Planets don't just glow in changing colors, and there wasn't a plane or helicopter light pattern. I went outside right away to see if I could spot anything with my own eyes, but the sky was clear, and I didn't see anything unusual. No lights, no shape, nothing. I showed the footage to my friend Lena. She's a wildlife biologist and knows a bit about drones and all that tech. She said, could be some kind of weird camera artifact or light reflection. I wanted to believe her, but the more I looked at the footage, the less sense it made. The next night, I set the camera up again, same spot, same time interval. I stayed out there longer, just watching the sky. The air smelled of salt and pine. Luna, my dog, a lean little border collie mix with sharp eyes, was restless, sniffing the ground and staring at the tree line. Around midnight, the wind picked up, and there was that low hum you sometimes get from distant power lines or a passing plane. But Luna stopped and growled low, staring toward the water. I looked that way too, but saw nothing. The camera caught the same shape again, this time a little higher in the sky, rotating, glowing faintly. The colors were more muted, pastel-like. When I reviewed the footage that morning, I noticed something else weird. The shape's rotation didn't seem consistent. Sometimes it spun clockwise, sometimes counterclockwise, but the stars were all steady and slow, drifting eastward like normal. The shape's movement didn't match any natural pattern. I started checking the local weather radar and flight paths for drones or aircraft, but nothing matched the time or location. Over the next week, it kept happening. Every night, the shape appeared somewhere in the frame, rotating and cycling colors. Sometimes it got close to the horizon, other times it was almost at the zenith. Luna never seemed relaxed during these nights. She'd follow me around, her ears twitching, alert to sounds I couldn't hear. One night, I decided to try and get a better look. I brought out my binoculars and set up a second camera with a zoom lens. I sat in the yard, Luna curled up next to me, fog rolling off the nearby harbor. The shape appeared around 11:45 p.m., just as the air got colder. I focused the binoculars on it, but it was oddly blurry, like looking at it through a heat haze or a dirty window. Then the colors started cycling again, deep green to blue to a dull amber. But there was something else, a faint pulsating glow, almost like it was breathing. I blinked and looked away, then back, and it had shifted slightly in position. No sudden jumps, just slow movement. I tried to catch it on the zoom camera, but the image kept distorting and pixelating strangely around the edges of the shape, almost like interference. I got the feeling it was watching me as much as I was watching it. After about half an hour, it drifted slowly upward and faded from view. The street lamps buzzed faintly, and Luna whimpered softly. The next day, I compared the timestamps from the cameras. The zoom lens camera had several minutes of missing footage, just black frames with static sound. The main time-lapse camera was fine. I kept replaying the footage, trying to see if maybe I missed something. A person, a drone, a balloon. Nothing. The shape didn't cast a shadow on the clouds or reflect light like anything I'd ever seen. Some nights, when the sky was overcast, the shape was absent. But I swear sometimes I could feel a presence nearby, like the air thickened and a low vibration thrummed through the ground. One evening, after a late shift at the diner, I stopped by the side yard to check the camera. It was a clear, cold night, and the stars were brilliant. Luna sat quietly beside me, tail flicking. I noticed the battery pack for the camera was warm, even though it hadn't been charging. That didn't make sense. The shape appeared again, low on the horizon, rotating slower than usual. This time, it wasn't just the color cycling. The shape's surface seemed to ripple, like waves on water. The light from it cast an odd glow on the nearest pine trees, but nothing else. I moved closer, trying not to spook Luna. As I watched, I saw a small part of the shape flicker and become transparent for a second, almost like it wasn't fully there. I snapped a photo with my phone. The camera lens focused on the sky, but when I checked the photo, the shape was gone, just empty blackness where it should have been. I put my phone down, feeling a tight knot in my chest. The next morning, I was exhausted. My dreams were strange, fragmented images of light and color, cold wind on my face, and Luna barking at shadows. The weirdness kept building. Sometimes the streetlights would flicker when the shape appeared in the sky. Sometimes my phone would lose signal or randomly reboot. One night, I set up a motion sensor by the back door. Luna was nervous, pacing inside the house. At about 2:30 a.m., the sensor picked something up, just a soft movement near the bushes. When I looked outside, nothing was there. The next morning, the motion sensor was off, the batteries dead. That same day, I checked the time-lapse footage from the previous night. The shape showed up briefly, but halfway through the clip, the entire sky went black for about 15 seconds, then returned to normal. The stars were frozen in place. I rubbed my eyes and stared for a long time. I couldn't explain any of it. My neighbors hadn't noticed anything. No reports on the news. Just me and Luna watching the sky, feeling the nights grow heavier, the silence louder. Sometimes I wonder if I was imagining it, if the long hours staring up and the loneliness of the cold nights were playing tricks on me. But then I see the footage again, the slow rotation, the color shifts, the strange rippling, and Luna won't stop watching the horizon, ears pricked, like she's waiting for something to come back. So here I am, still pointing the camera up, waiting for the shape to appear, hoping to catch something that makes sense. But for now, all I have are questions, a restless dog, and a sky that keeps hiding secrets I can't quite reach.